Welcome to my channel. In my channel, you can watch various type of fiction and fantasy audiobook. If you want more video like this, please subscribe my channel.
Don Machi, starting with becoming a divine apprentice. Part 1. Should I go to Orario? Looking at the old house, which contained very little furniture, only two beds, one for his grandfather and one for himself, a table and chairs, and a heating fireplace, Bell sat next to the warm fireplace, muttering to himself. That's right, he wasn't the original Bell, though he could still be called Bell. My name is Bell Cronell, and people who know me usually call me Bell. As everyone knows, I am a transmigrator. I managed to narrowly dodge the dump truck, only to be sent to the afterlife by a flowerpot falling from the sky. I have been a transmigrator since the womb. Although he was a transmigrator, he only truly awakened his memories 7 years ago. When he first awakened his memories, he carried the arrogance of a transmigrator, believing he was a prophet who knew many things and possessed advanced thinking, but one incident shattered all of that. At the time, wild boars kept stealing crops from the field, so Bell planned to learn from hunters and catch them using traps. He had dug a pit near the field and prepared a rock tied to the top of a tree. When the boar fell into the pit, the rock would drop. According to Bell's book knowledge, that should have been enough. Just as Bell and his village friends were celebrating catching the wild boar, the boar tossed aside the broken stones and dirt and leapt out of the pit. The wild boar was enraged and charged directly at the children. Facing those sharp tusks and the terror between life and death, Bell realized this was not just a simple novel or anime. The so-called modern person's thinking was meaningless against powerful strength, especially since he had only been a student with no practical experience before transmigrating. The children panicked and scattered. Bell told the others to leave first and notify capable people to handle the situation. He would lure the wild boar away. At least compared to the children who knew nothing, he had the ability to stall the boar for enough time. Bell came up with a plan, deciding to use the scarecrows as cover. He quickly ran toward the edge of the field, with the wild boar close behind him. Bell moved nimbly between the scarecrows, sometimes hiding behind them, sometimes circling around the side. The wild boar had poor eyesight and could only track him by scent. It knocked down scarecrows again and again but could never touch Bell in the slightest. Who? Bell gasped for breath, fine beads of sweat trickling down his forehead. He recalled a documentary he had once watched. Although wild boars had poor eyesight, their sense of smell was extremely acute. If only I could find something to attract or drive it away. Bell looked around, searching for something useful. Suddenly, Bell's foot slipped, and he fell heavily into the mud. He scrambled to get up, only to feel a sharp pain shoot through his ankle. The wild boar seized the opportunity and charged over, its tusks gleaming coldly, its eyes filled with ferocity. Bell clenched his teeth and painfully dragged his injured foot backward. His hands fumbled along the ground, hoping to find something he could use to defend himself. However, there was nothing but dirt and broken stones. The wild boar crept closer, and Bell could clearly smell the rank odor emanating from it. Fear washed over his heart like a tide, and Bell involuntarily closed his eyes. Am I really going to die here? He thought despairingly. Just at this critical moment, a sharp sound of something cutting through the air broke the silence. Immediately afterward, the wild boar let out a mournful shriek. Bell snapped his eyes open, only to see a feathered arrow firmly embedded in the wild boar's hind leg. Bell looked in the direction the arrow had flown from and saw a familiar figure, his grandfather, Zeus, standing not far away. In his hand, he held an old but well-maintained hunting bow. Grandpa! Bell cried out in surprise and joy, tears of excitement welling up in his eyes. Zeus didn't respond, instead focusing intently on aiming at the wild boar. He smoothly drew an arrow, nocked it, and aimed, completing the action in one fluid motion. The second arrow whistled out, accurately hitting the wild boar's vital spot. The beast let out one final wail and crashed heavily to the ground. The moment the danger was lifted, Bell collapsed onto the ground, his body shaking uncontrollably. Zeus quickly walked over and knelt down to check Bell's injuries. Are you all right, kid? His rough palm gently stroked Bell's ankle. I'm fine, Grandpa. Bell forced a smile, suppressing the pain. Your archery is truly incredible. Zeus snorted, if you hadn't been messing around, would I have had to run all this way to save you? Although his tone was severe, Bell still saw the undeniable concern in his grandfather's eyes. I'm sorry, Grandpa. Bell lowered his head. I thought I could handle it, but I almost got myself hurt and caused you trouble. Zeus sighed and patted Bell on the shoulder. Remember today's lesson. This world is far more complex than you imagine. Relying only on your brain isn't enough. Bell nodded. This experience made him profoundly realize how pale and powerless so-called modern thinking was in the face of true danger. He secretly vowed that he must diligently train and learn practical skills if he wanted to gain a foothold in this world. All right, stop standing around. Zeus stood up. Help me drag this wild boar back. We'll have a feast tonight. Bell's eyes lit up. That's great. Grandpa, your roasted wild boar is the most delicious in the whole village. Stop flattering me. Although Zeus said this, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Get moving quickly. Don't think a little injury means you can slack off. The aroma of roasted meat was like invisible tentacles, teasing Bell's taste buds. However, this scent, which should have been pleasant, now tasted incredibly bitter to him, as if mocking his weakness and incompetence. The fiercely burning bonfire reflected Bell's lonely figure and illuminated the confusion and struggle deep within his heart. Grandpa Zeus sat nearby, silently observing his grandson's reaction. After a long pause, he softly said, Bell, you are not the stuff of heroes. These words were like a sharp sword, piercing Bell's last shred of self-esteem. He opened his mouth, wanting to argue back, but found he didn't even have the courage to speak. Ordinary people are just ordinary people. This cruel fact was now deeply engraved in his heart. Bell recalled his performance when facing the wild boar, and his heart was filled with self-contempt. He was weak, timid, afraid of death, and he was not the Bell with the simple personality, kind heart, and clumsy actions. In the end, he wasn't the original Bell, but since he had transmigrated into this world, would the original Bell's fate fall upon him? The last of the world's three great quests, the one-eyed black dragon, this terrifying existence loomed over his heart like a shadow. He had thought about this for a long time. If he couldn't overcome this obstacle, disaster would eventually strike. Bell didn't want the people of this world to pay the price because of his transmigration. He knew this thought was arrogant, but he couldn't stop thinking about it, and ever since then, he frequently dreamed of the black dragon destroying the world. Deep down, a thought gradually took shape. He needed power, immense power. From that day on, the 7-year-old Bell began arduous training while managing farm work. Since he had no talent, he would make up for it with diligence. Every morning, when other children were still sound asleep in their warm beds, he had already started his morning run. When night fell, he was still swinging a rusty iron sword he had gotten from the swordsman uncle in the yard until sweat soaked his clothes. The number of times no longer mattered. Day after day, year after year, through wind and rain, he never stopped. His frail body gradually grew stronger. Bell knew this path was destined to be arduous and long. But whenever he wanted to give up, he would remember the wild boar meat and tears from that night, recall the questions in his heart and his grandfather's evaluation. These memories were like a whip, lashing his weary body and mind, forcing him to keep moving forward. He was no longer that naive transmigrator, but an ordinary person struggling for survival. Bell firmly believed that as long as he kept working hard, one day he would have the strength to stand before that terrifying fate. Perhaps his efforts finally paid off. At age 13, 1 year before the story began, he obtained a system. Wheel of Fate activating. Activation successful. Wheel of Fate. Bell was captivated by the text before his eyes. Now he had only one thought. His golden finger had finally arrived. After some research, Bell understood that his golden finger was based on changing fate. The greater his impact on the world's development and the more he altered the weight of key figures across different worlds, the more rewards he could obtain for draws. The Wheel of Fate had 3 types in total: gold, silver, and bronze. Regarding changing fate, Bell already had ideas. Then Bell wanted to find a master. In the original work, Bell had never learned combat skills before heading to Orario. If he could learn combat techniques and overcome his fear of battle, perhaps that would count as part of changing fate. But Bell had no candidates. The surrounding villages only had old hunters and farmers who couldn't teach him combat methods. In the end, he turned to his grandfather. Logically speaking, as a god, his grandfather should know some adventurers. If they could teach him, he could accumulate combat experience. Grandfather looked troubled, clearly finding Bell's request difficult. But seeing Bell's determined gaze, he recalled his past life in the familia with those children. He pondered for a moment, then suddenly his eyes lit up as if he had thought of a good idea. A few days later, a blue-haired woman wearing a hood appeared at the door, her gentle gaze peering at Bell from under the brim. "This is Teacher Themis. She will teach you archery." Grandfather introduced her, his tone carrying a hint of relief. Bell looked at this beautiful older sister in surprise. She appeared frail at first glance, but adventurers shouldn't be judged by appearances. In the original work, the Sword Princess was also slender, yet her strength was considerable. And so, Bell began learning under Themis. Themis patiently guided Bell in holding the bow and knocking arrows, corrected his posture, and encouraged him to keep practicing. Day after day, under Themis's guidance, Bell gradually mastered archery skills. However, fate seemed to think this wasn't enough. Not long after, another woman visited their home. Grandfather's expression became somewhat awkward, looking as if he had a headache. "This is Leah. She will teach you swordsmanship." Grandfather seemed to find it troublesome but cautiously told Bell, "Bell, this training might be a bit strict. If you can't handle it, give up. If there are problems, I'll deal with them." After hearing this, Bell observed Teacher Leah. She appeared gentle-faced, with a soft light shimmering in her eyes and a compassionate demeanor, showing no signs of strictness. He thought such a gentle older sister probably wouldn't be too harsh. But the first lesson made Bell understand what strictness meant. Sword light flashed like lightning, cold glints suddenly appearing. Leah's sword blade cut through the air toward him. Bell's heart trembled, instinctively raising his sword to meet it. Clang! The sharp sound of sword clashing against sword was piercing to the ears and eyes. Bell felt his wrist go numb, the wooden sword nearly slipping from his grasp. Only then did he realize with shock that this was no training session, it was clearly a life-or-death struggle. Leah's gaze was like a torch, each sword strike aimed at vital points. Bell flustered about, panicking and scrambling left and right in disarray. Thwack! The sword tip sliced through skin and flesh, blood splattering. Bell gasped sharply, the tearing pain nearly making him kneel on the ground. But he clenched his teeth tightly, forcing himself to stand up. Leah slightly furrowed her brows, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Continue." She uttered 2 words calmly, though the corner of her mouth imperceptibly lifted into a slight curve. Bell panted heavily, sweat pouring down like rain, every part of his body screaming in pain. But his eyes burned with unyielding fire as he raised his sword again. Leah's sword techniques grew increasingly fierce, sweeping over him like a violent storm. Bell felt surrounded with no escape. His physical limits were broken again and again, pushed further each time. His consciousness began to blur, his vision gradually darkening. Yet that defiant spirit grew stronger, as if trying to break free from the shackles of flesh and blood, radiating an unprecedented light. Leah's gaze gradually turned solemn. This boy seemed to have unusual potential. Every day when training ended, he was covered in wounds. But deep inside, an unyielding will burned. Watching Bell's growth, the strictness in Leah's eyes was gradually replaced by satisfaction. "Bell, you're tougher than I imagined," she said softly, her tone carrying appreciation. Hearing these words, a sense of pride surged within Bell. He knew he was growing stronger step by step. The teachings of Teacher Themis and Teacher Leah allowed Bell to gradually master combat techniques. But more importantly, he found his own source of strength, at least he wouldn't wander aimlessly anymore. And so, a month passed. Finally, late at night. Ding! Obtained 1 use of the Bronze Fate Wheel. Bronze Wheel. No matter what, Bell was the protagonist of Danmachi. Changing his initial fate only earned him 1 chance at the Bronze Wheel. Use Bronze Fate Wheel. Bell didn't care about protagonist status anymore, he'd try it first. He responded in his mind, use. A massive bronze wheel appeared in his mind, looking somewhat like the compass from the Shenzhou in Honkai. Star rail from his previous life, ancient and mysterious. Bell stood before the wheel, observing its distribution. It was divided into three main categories: talent, item, and none, with a ratio of 1, 3, 5. So why was there a none category? Was it like, thank you for your patronage? Unable to complain, Bell left his fate to heaven. He gave it a strong spin, then closed his eyes and began praying. I offer 10 years of my good brother's lifespan from my previous life and 10 years of singlehood, hoping for something good. The wheel's pointer began rotating, accelerating, then slowing, finally stopping. What is this? He watched as the roulette pointer landed on talent, followed by a flash of purple light. Obtained proficiency mastery, bronze rank, slightly enhances learning ability. Wishing the user a pleasant life. Proficiency mastery. Hiss. That doesn't seem bad. If it can also provide a boost to the divine blessing in Danmachi, then perhaps. As the training progressed, Bell gradually discovered the formidable strengths of his two teachers. The swordsmanship and archery they taught far surpassed mortal comprehension. Under the offensive pressure from teacher Ria, Bell was forcibly tempered, honing the survival instinct of intuition. It wasn't until 10 days later, when the system panel displayed Divine Age Swordsmanship LV.1 and Divine Age Archery LV.1, that Bell suddenly realized, these two were actually deities. At the same time, he marveled, this is only a slight boost to learning ability, yet it helped me master divine arts. That's incredible. What level of ability would silver and gold ranks be? Bell was so excited that, if not for the worry of his grandfather noticing something amiss, he would have immediately begged his teacher to let him join her familia, wanting to test if the talent could also affect the divine blessing. After a month of training concluded, teacher Themis put away her bow. Seeing that Bell's archery had reached a preliminary level, well, a deity's standard of preliminary, she said softly, Bell, you have grasped the basics. I can take my leave now. Bell was about to speak up to ask her to stay when he saw teacher Themis had already turned to leave. Her steps were hurried, her blue hair beneath the hood fluttering in the wind. Teacher Ria placed a hand on his shoulder and shook her head. Focus on your swordsmanship training, teacher Ria's tone remained stern. Days passed in the swing of swords and the flow of sweat. Teacher Ria's instruction grew increasingly strict, testing Bell with new techniques every day. Her brown long hair danced in the training field, her swordplay sharp and elegant. Time flew by in an instant. A year had passed. One early morning, Bell found his grandfather's room empty and realized it was time for him to leave. Next, it's off to Orario. Yet, a faint trace of unease still lingered in Bell's heart. I hope this is the right choice. Time to sleep. I have to head out early tomorrow. With anticipation and trepidation, holding his bow, Bell soon fell into a deep sleep. Though the quilt was rough, it was surprisingly comfortable, the only time when his mind could be emptied of thoughts. They say carefree people sleep well. Bell felt he had plenty of worries, yet his sleep quality these past 2 days had been excellent, basically falling asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow, completely unlike someone with so many pre-sleep concerns. Bell opened his eyes to find he had slept soundly until dawn, his body feeling unprecedentedly relaxed. He stretched his limbs and immediately felt refreshed and full of energy. Bell sat up from the bed, stretched, then walked to the window and pulled open the heavy curtains. Sunlight immediately poured in, warmly bathing his face, making him squint involuntarily. He carefully observed the scene outside, noting that although tree branches still swayed in the wind, the sky was a bright, clear blue. The ground looked dry and firm, with no traces of mud, which relieved Bell. The journey through the forest should be much easier. He turned and began packing, carefully placing necessities one by one into his backpack. Finally, Bell shouldered the heavy pack, feeling its weight on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, slowly turned around, and let his gaze linger on the home he had lived in for many years, every corner evoking countless memories. I hope I'll have the chance to return someday. Goodbye. Bell said softly, his voice tinged with a hint of reluctance and anticipation. He took one last, deep look, then resolutely pushed open the door and stepped out with firm strides. At the crack of dawn, a tall, straight figure stood at the village entrance. Teacher Ria held a brand new sword, quietly awaiting her disciple's arrival. As Belle approached, Ria handed him the sword, her expression serious yet carrying a touch of gentleness. This is your graduation gift, Belle. Though not a masterwork, it was forged by a master's hand. Durable and reliable, it should suffice to accompany you through your early adventures. Belle took the sword, feeling its weight. The blade gleamed with a cold luster, yet it felt warm in his hand. Ria gazed at the youth who had grown over the past year, her tone tinged with emotion. Remember the day your grandfather came to find me? I initially didn't want to agree to take you as a disciple. But over this past year, your performance has made me see you in a new light. She paused, then continued, your diligence exceeded my expectations. I could see the desire for power in your eyes, that blazing light was impressive. Listening to his teacher's evaluation, a surge of pride and gratitude welled up in Belle's heart. He was about to speak when he noticed Ria's eyes suddenly grow profound, as if lost in some memory. But Belle, remember this, safety is always more important than power. Ria's voice grew low. Once, there was a child who lost their way because of this. She didn't finish, merely shaking her head gently. Belle keenly sensed the warning and concern in her words. I understand, teacher. Belle nodded solemnly. I will remember your teachings, not forgetting myself while pursuing power. As parting approached, Belle suddenly felt a lump in his throat. The memories of the past year flooded in like a tide, almost overwhelming him. He took a deep breath, struggling to hold back the tears threatening to spill. Goodbye, teacher. Belle straightened his back and called out loudly. Ria looked at her disciple, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She knew this youth was about to embark on his own adventure. All she could do was point him in the right direction at the starting line and wish him success in overcoming all obstacles. Belle entered the forest, leaves rustling underfoot as if seeing him off. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, falling on his shoulders, gilding his journey with a layer of golden hope. Belle tightened the heavy fur coat gifted by the hunter uncle. Cold wind seeped through the gaps, making him shiver involuntarily. Icy air filled his lungs, carrying the fresh scent of earth and pine needles. Belle took a deep breath, feeling his spirits lift. Surroundings were quiet, with only the rustle of wind through leaves and the calls of unknown birds in the distance. Rubbing his already reddened, frozen hands, Belle vigilantly gripped his bow tighter, his gaze scanning the surrounding thickets, always on guard against potential lurking dangers. Suddenly, the bushes rustled. Belle held his breath, instantly drawing the bowstring to full tension. A wild rabbit darted out from the grass. Almost instinctively, he released his fingers. With a whoosh, the arrow shot through the air, hitting its target squarely. The rabbit's life faded before it even hit the ground. Good luck. Belle murmured to himself, a faint smile curling at the corner of his mouth. Though his backpack was stuffed with enough rations for over 10 days, fresh food was always more welcome. He skillfully skewered the rabbit with a branch and set it over a makeshift campfire to roast. Sprinkling some salt grains he carried, the aroma soon wafted through the air. Watching the meat gradually change color, Belle couldn't help but swallow. Even in another world, good food remained an indispensable comfort in life. When the meat was fragrant and sizzling, Belle eagerly took a bite. He squinted contentedly, savoring this rare delicacy. Though his roasting skills still needed improvement, compared to dry rations, this was a veritable feast. Chewing slowly, Belle pondered the journey ahead. The skills gained from this year of training were quite useful. Belle glanced at his status panel. Belle. Talent. Proficiency Mastery. Abilities. Cooking LV.6, Intuition LV.6, Divine Age Swordsmanship LV.6, Divine Age Archery LV.5, Trap Making LV.3, Stealth LV.2, Item Crafting LV.1, Medicine Making LV.1. Levels 1 to 9 fall within the realm of mortal arts. Levels 10 to 15 are divine tier. However, deities cannot use divine power or high-level materials in the mortal realm, so the effect of divine arts in the mortal world is capped at level 10. No matter how high one's skill, without materials, even the most skilled housewife can't cook without rice. Over the past year, besides learning combat techniques from his divine teachers, he also learned some hunting skills from the hunter uncle. After all, the journey to Orario was long, and having hunting skills meant he wouldn't have to worry about food. His deep gaze looked into the distance at that winding, twisting forest. 30 li. This distance might be nothing on a flat road, but in these remote mountains and forests, it was an arduous trek. He sighed lightly, a slight frown creasing his brow. This road to Orario is truly less than ideal. Bell muttered to himself, his fingers unconsciously rubbing the dagger at his waist. There wasn't a single horse fit for riding in the village, and no merchant caravans had passed through in recent days. Bell knew this meant he could only rely on his own 2 feet to measure out this long journey. It would be great if I could catch a ride. He gave a self-deprecating smile. With this face of mine, acting cute shouldn't be too hard, right? Bell was well aware of his advantages. That handsome face of his could not only attract the gaze of the opposite romance but was also a handy tool for escaping in critical moments. He wasn't ashamed of this, instead, he regarded it as an important skill on the path of adventure. However, at this moment, that face was of no use. Bell took a deep breath, adjusted the position of his backpack, and prepared to set out on his solitary journey. He had left at daybreak, and by the time the sun had almost set, finally, before night completely fell, Bell saw the edge of the forest. Great, I thought I was lost and would have to spend the night in the forest. To be honest, if he had been a bit later, Bell wouldn't have wanted to spend the night in the forest either. In his original world, camping might have been common, but that was because it was safe. In this world, a night in the forest was full of unknown dangers for him. In this world teeming with magical beasts, spending the night in the wilderness was far from wise. Just traversing this forest, he had already encountered countless threats. Massive bears roared between the trees, emitting terrifying low growls. Lizards over a meter long flicked crimson forked tongues, their eyes gleaming with dangerous light. Enormous birds of prey circled in the sky, their sharp claws ready to attack at any moment. Bell cautiously avoided these dangerous creatures, afraid of disturbing them. He didn't try to provoke them. Just sensing their presence made it clear they wouldn't be easy to deal with. His weapons were limited, he could kill them, but getting injured would be hard to treat, so he had to take detours. All along the way, Bell's intuition had been giving him slight warnings. The complexity of the forest was giving him a headache. Bell was almost lost here. He had no choice but to repeatedly climb tall trees, straining to identify the direction. Fortunately, he had finally escaped from that place. The moment he stepped out of the forest, Bell let out a long sigh of relief, as if reborn. But he needed to be even more careful from now on. If the greatest danger in the forest was the monsters hidden in the shadows, then the danger outside came from human nature. Leaving the forest, Bell didn't pause for a moment, striding swiftly in the direction of Orario. Sunlight bathed his body, a stark contrast to the dark, damp environment of the forest. Strange, this area doesn't seem to have any trace of magical beasts. Bell warily scanned his surroundings, his fingers instinctively reaching for the dagger at his waist. The clear calls of birds came from the distance, a breeze brushed his face, carrying the scent of earth and grass. This tranquility reminded Bell of his days in the village, and he couldn't help but relax his tense nerves. Looks like I've entered an area frequented by adventurers. Gazing at the remnants of fighting on the ground, Bell softly speculated, this does save a lot of trouble. The lack of magical beast harassment certainly made the journey much smoother, but it also meant losing the opportunity to hunt for supplies. Bell felt his already deflated pack and sighed. When he stepped onto the main road leading to Orario, the deep ruts in the ground made Bell's eyes light up. These marks silently spoke of the road's busyness, confirming he hadn't taken a wrong turn. Days of continuous travel gave Bell a new understanding of his own changes. His muscles had become more solid, his breathing was no longer as ragged as at the start. Through this long-distance trek, Bell had made significant progress. Bell couldn't help but think, perhaps I'm a martial arts genius. Is this the growth that comes from venturing out? Bell clenched his fist, feeling the power surging within him. Yet deep inside, an indescribable sense of restlessness was spreading. For the first time in over 10 years, he had been away from the village for so long, and homesickness inevitably welled up in his heart. 2 months later, looking at the clearly increased number of wheel ruts by the roadside and the increasingly distinct silhouette of the Tower of Babel at the end of the road. Bell abruptly stopped, his ears twitching slightly. The intuition honed by years of hunting life made him sense something abnormal in the surroundings. His intuition was also warning him. A hint of unusual tension hung in the air, as if some danger was quietly approaching. Suddenly, an arrow shot out from the shadows. Following his intuition, Bell dropped his stance low. The arrow narrowly grazed his hair. He reacted swiftly, raising his bow in one smooth motion, knocking an arrow, and firing a quick shot towards the source of the arrow. Ah! A cry of pain came from the thicket. A cold smile curled at the corner of Bell's mouth. It seemed these guys were just a ragtag bunch, not even capable of a proper ambush. Without hesitation, he fired several arrows in succession, each one precise and accurate. Screams of pain rose one after another. Clearly, those hiding in the shadows had suffered quite a bit. Soon, several bandits with arrows in them were forced out by Bell. They looked panicked, clearly not expecting to be bested by a seemingly harmless young boy. Bell expressionlessly sized up this group of disheveled robbers. Their clothes were tattered, their weapons rusted and worn. One look told him they were desperate outlaws who couldn't make it elsewhere. Gentlemen. Bell's tone was icy, his eyes revealing killing intent. I'll give you two choices. Either scram right now, or stay here forever. As he spoke, he deftly looted the valuables from the group. A pitiful few pieces of valise, a couple of barely usable weapons, plus some ragged clothes. Bell shook his head, leaving only a few pieces of clothing that could barely cover their modesty for them. Hey, kid. One of the robbers couldn't help but speak up, you're just leaving like this. We'll remember this. Bell turned around, glanced at their wounds. I almost forgot about that. What do you think I should do? Perhaps. Before he could finish, the leader among the robbers hurriedly covered his subordinate's mouth. Bell felt a bit mischievous, feeling that the frustration of the journey had dissipated a lot. His mood lightened. But he was right, so Bell knocked the men unconscious, tied them to a tree, then left behind a record of their misdeeds, leaving their fate to Providence. Whether they were rescued by passers-by, killed, or eaten by ferocious beasts, Bell didn't care. He considered it their punishment. There was no helping it. According to transmigrator experience, he should eliminate the root of the problem to prevent future trouble. But Bell's previous life was just that of a high school student who had never seen blood, and now he was only a 14-year-old boy. The combined experience of both lifetimes couldn't compare to those who had seen much of the world. Over the years, he might have killed many beasts, but when facing humans, the weight of a life became so heavy. Bell turned to leave but paused again. He looked back at the group of disheveled robbers and muttered to himself, if you get a chance to be rescued, try to start over. But if we meet again, and you're still bandits, you won't be so lucky. After saying this, Bell said no more and strode forward. He knew this decision might not be wise and could even plant hidden dangers for himself. But at this moment, he wasn't ready to casually take another's life, at least not now. Although this incident had delayed Bell somewhat, it also made him realize that after leaving the familiar forest, danger was everywhere. So his pace gradually quickened as he ran towards the direction of Orario. It seems this world is even more chaotic than I imagined. Bell muttered to himself. So this is Orario. It's truly heart-stirring. Standing on the slope and gazing at that magical city at the end of his vision, the throbbing in his heart was incredibly intense. With the towering white chalk tower standing at its center, Belcrinel couldn't help but shout, Labyrinth City Orario, here I come. After he finished shouting, a merchant uncle nearby, dressed in linen, wearing a wide hat, and carrying a bundle, teased him loudly, ha ha ha, little fellow, that was quite the spirited shout. I've got high hopes for you. After his loud shout, Belcrinel suddenly realized how childish his behavior was. His cheeks instantly flushed bright red, and his toes curled up involuntarily, as if he wanted to bury himself in the ground. Oh, you're young, it's normal to be a bit excited. The merchant uncle said with a chuckle, when I first came to Orario, I was even more excited than you. Belcranel scratched his head awkwardly. Uncle, have you been here many times? Haha, that's right. The uncle patted the bundle on his back. I come every month to bring some local specialties for the adventurers. Belcranel's eyes lit up. Then you must be very familiar with this place, right? It's all right, the uncle said modestly. Why, young man, is there something you want to ask? Belcranel hesitated for a moment. I want to become an adventurer, so I was wondering if you had any advice, uncle. A flash of surprise crossed the uncle's eyes, followed by a knowing smile. I see. Well, you'd better be mentally prepared. This path isn't an easy one. I know, Belcranel tightened his fists, but I've already made up my mind. Looking at the determined look in Belcranel's eyes, the uncle smiled and patted his shoulder. Good lad. But before you rush in, I have a few things to remind you of. Belcranel nodded quickly. Please, go ahead. First, the uncle held up a finger. Finding a reliable familia is very important. Don't be fooled by sweet talk. Ask around more before making a decision. Second, he held up a second finger. Don't trust others easily, especially in taverns. Those places are a paradise for swindlers. Finally, the uncle said solemnly, never forget your original intention for coming here. The dungeon is dangerous, but what's even more terrifying is losing yourself. Belcranel earnestly noted down every word. Thank you, uncle. I will keep them in mind. Go on, young man. The uncle smiled and waved his hand. Orario welcomes you. Belcranel took a deep breath, bowed to the uncle, and then ran toward the city gates without looking back. The city gates were right before his eyes, and Belcranel's heart beat faster and faster. Come on, Orario, Belcranel whispered to himself, let's see what surprises you can bring me. But before Belcranel could even enter the gate, he was cut off mid-stride. Hey, hold it right there, kid. The staff member in charge of security checks stopped Belcranel. First time in Orario, I assume. Seeing Belcranel's cramped and uneasy appearance, the demi-human male pushed up his glasses and explained with a professional smile. After all, I have a lot of experience checking thousands of people every day, and only you newcomers would rush straight in so recklessly. I guess you're right. Standing before the gates of Orario, Belcranel was immersed in the joy of finally reaching his destination, neglecting the crowd of people waiting in line for inspection around him. Young man over here, turn around. An inspector in uniform waved him over. Belcranel suddenly snapped back to his senses, his thoughts pulled back to reality. Sorry. Following the example of others, Belcranel turned around to show his back. The lantern in the inspector's hand moved slowly across his back, emitting a faint blue light that gave him a strange, tingling sensation. Don't move, we are confirming the presence of a divine blessing. This is a check conducted to prevent spies belonging to other countries or cities. According to the inspector, this magic item would react to ichor. It seems they are screening for suspicious individuals. Belcranel thought to himself, perhaps it's to prevent the followers of certain hostile deities from sneaking into the city. The anime had never mentioned these details, which made Belcranel increasingly alert. This wasn't a fictional story, but a real world full of danger and opportunity. Standing on the bustling streets of Orario, Belcranel took a deep breath. This was the holy land for countless adventurers, a stage where fates intertwined, and the place where he was about to start a new chapter. Entering the labyrinth city, it was narrow at first, just enough for people to pass, but after walking dozens of steps, it suddenly opened up. A prosperous market street ran straight through the plaza, with white flagstones and a road wide enough for several carriages to drive side by side. Numerous shops lined the street, and with the white chalk tower at its center, this otherworldly beauty was revealed to Belcranel, who had just entered the city. Belcranel couldn't help but be dazzled. However, he was soon given a push by the people coming in behind him. Belcranel apologized, hurried out of the way, and intended to follow his plan to find a familia to join. Logically, Belcranel should join the Hestia familia just like in the original story, but he knew very well that he wasn't the original Belcranel. He didn't know if he shared the same fate as the original Bel's past life, and it wasn't clear if Goddess Hestia was even looking for familia members yet. If there was a chance, it would still be better to join the Hestia Familia. Aside from that, if he wanted to increase his strength quickly, the only ones worth considering were the Loki Familia and the Ganesha Familia. As for the Freya Familia, they were out of the question. Although he might not have the original's pure soul, he knew what he was like. He was afraid of being targeted by Freya. Thinking about the frantic slaughter in the battle wilderness, although it would increase his strength quickly, it was too terrifying. Belcrenel shook his head, dispersing the thought. He was trying to avoid her, so why would he want to deliver himself to her door? The next one was the Ganesha Familia. The Ganesha Familia was a familia established by the Indian deity Ganesha. Since Ganesha always wore an elephant mask on a daily basis, the Ganesha Familia was also known as the Elephant God Familia. As for the Loki Familia, Loki wasn't the brother of Odin from mythology, nor was she the god of stories from Marvel, but a red-haired prankster with squinting eyes. In the original work, she was said to be a terrifying deity who caused slaughter among the gods in the heavens and stirred up a bloodbath. Although she had restrained herself a lot after descending to the lower world, would she see through his identity as a transmigrator? Perhaps Loki would find it very interesting. Belcrenel purposefully headed to the guild's office headquarters first. The person who received him was an intellectual half-elf woman wearing oval glasses, with pointed ears and clear emerald green eyes. Her medium-length brown hair had a lustrous sheen, and her beautiful features weren't as perfect and distinct as those of a pure elf. Her slender figure looked very good in her brown suit uniform. This was Aina Toole, the receptionist who had assisted the protagonist in the original work. Excuse me, Ms. Aina, do all the gods register here when they establish a familia? I want to join a familia. Could you tell me which ones are currently recruiting? Aina was momentarily captivated by Belle's snow-white hair and crimson eyes, but she quickly snapped back to her senses. Sorry, I'll find the information for you right away. Aina hurriedly rummaged through her documents, her hands trembling slightly and her cheeks feeling a bit warm. She handed the organized materials to Belle, stroking her flushed cheeks while secretly wondering why she was so flustered. By the way, she calmed down and spoke professionally, are you a newcomer? Why don't you register with the guild first? If any familia is recruiting and there's a suitable match, we can notify you. Bell straightened his back. I want to join a powerful familia. I want to become stronger. It's better not to aim too high. Currently, the Loki familia basically doesn't recruit newcomers, their new members are all sourced from the education district. The Freya familia, on the other hand, poaches members from other familias, or the goddess herself personally hand-picks candidates. As for other large familias, recruiting is just a matter of luck. Bell didn't mind. After all, things depend on individual effort. If it really didn't work out, he'd find another way. He took a quick look at the materials, memorized the information, confirmed the locations of the Ganesha Familia and Loki Familia, and set off. Goddess Hestia, who was still freeloading at the Hephaestus Familia, felt a sudden chill, as if something belonging to her was about to be snatched away. Thinking back carefully, she still had no clue. Hestia continued her idle life, lazily slumped on a sofa in the Hephaestus Familia, clutching grapes in one hand and a wine glass in the other, her mouth stuffed with desserts. She squinted contentedly, fully immersed in this carefree lifestyle. Suddenly, a chill hit her from behind. Hestia shuddered, and a grape almost slipped from her hand. She turned her head alertly, only to see Goddess Hephaestus standing behind her with a dark expression, her gaze as sharp as a knife. Ah! Hephaestus! Hestia cried out in surprise and hurriedly jumped up from the sofa. I'm leaving right now. Hephaestus looked at her coldly and said, emphasizing every word, hurry up and go find your own familia members. As soon as she finished speaking, Hestia felt a powerful force lift her up. The next second, she had been thrown out of the blacksmith goddess's familia residence. Bang! The heavy door slammed shut in front of Hestia with a loud bang. The blue ribbon goddess sat on the ground in a pathetic state, looking at the closed door with a face full of grievance and resentment. Geez, Hephaestus is way too heartless. Hestia grumbled as she stood up and brushed the dust off her clothes. It's not like I haven't found a suitable child yet. She looked around and found herself thrown onto a bustling street. Passers-by looked curiously at this suddenly appearing goddess, and some even pulled out magical recording devices. Hestia sighed, adjusted her blue ribbon, and began to walk aimlessly along the street. She secretly calculated in her heart, where should she go to find familia members? A tavern, the Adventurers Guild, or just wait at the entrance of the dungeon. Bang! The heavy wooden door slammed shut in front of Belle, the deafening sound echoing in the silent dusk. Goddess Loki isn't at the familia, you should come back in a while. That Loki familia member looked at Belle's somewhat thin frame. Although there were some muscle lines, most of him was hidden by that overcoat, so he was perceived as a child. He shook his head. Child, Orario is not a simple place. You should go back. Although Belle had shown a bit of his strength in front of him, the familia had no plans to recruit anyway, so he'd better go try his luck elsewhere. Belle took a deep breath and wandered aimlessly through the streets of the labyrinth city, letting his thoughts churn in his mind. As the sky grew dark, the magic lamps along the street lit up one by one, their soft glow draping the city in a layer of dreamy mist. He looked up at the towering white chalk tower in the distance, its silhouette reaching into the clouds appearing exceptionally mysterious in the twilight. Belle couldn't help but marvel at the wonder and grandeur of this city. The bustling crowds on the street, the adventurers in groups of 2 or 3, and those brightly dressed nobles, all served to remind Belle of his own insignificance and helplessness. He lowered his head, staring at the cobblestone road beneath his feet, feeling loneliness and confusion spread through his heart. If he didn't have a skill like Liaris Freeze to quickly increase his strength, a large familia could shorten the gap with the original story to some extent, but currently, it seems large familias are hard to get into. It looks like I can only join the Hestia familia. Growl. The growl from his stomach pulled Belle back to reality. I need to find a place to rest. Belle murmured to himself, his gaze shifting between the surrounding buildings. He soon found a decent-looking inn and pushed the door open. The warm light inside the shop was comfortable, but the following conversation made Belle feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. 800 valis for one night. Belle's eyes widened, unable to believe his ears. This is too expensive, isn't it? Isn't a normal shop only 300 valis? The dwarf shopkeeper behind the counter stroked his beard and gave a slightly sympathetic smile. Little fellow, you're talking about outside Orario. This is the labyrinth city, prices are just this high. To be honest, my place is already considered cheap. If you stay for 3 consecutive days, I'll give you a discount, it'll only be 2,000 valis. Belle frowned and instinctively touched his wallet. 3,000 valis, he had originally thought it would last for a while, but now it seemed it would only cover 3 nights. Considering food, he couldn't even maintain 3 nights. Seeing Belle's distressed face, the dwarf shopkeeper suddenly lowered his voice. If you want to earn some extra cash, you can check out the underground market. It's in the back alley of the Drunken Cat Tavern, in the West District, but be careful, that place isn't peaceful. Belle nodded in thanks, but in his heart, he was considering other options. The underground market didn't sound like a good place, he didn't want to get into trouble before he even started his adventure. As the night deepened, the labyrinth city remained brightly lit. In this city where opportunities and challenges coexisted, Belle regretfully walked out of the inn, intending to find a place on the street to spend the night. Munch. Chewing on his remaining dry rations, he unknowingly walked for a while and unexpectedly found himself at the base of the Tower of Babel, near the entrance to the labyrinth. Looking at the entrance to the labyrinth, Belle was momentarily stunned. Suddenly, he had a good idea. Why not try going into the labyrinth to earn some valis? His strength was decent, and the first 3 floors only had small monsters like goblins. Staying within the first 3 floors shouldn't be dangerous, and he could earn some valis. Belle stood in place, carefully checking the short sword at his waist, confirming the blade was still sharp and the hilt was tied securely. He reached out to touch the wooden bow on his back, his fingers lightly plucking the bowstring, listening to that familiar hum. The fletched arrows in the quiver were neatly arranged, he counted about 20. Although not many, they should be enough for a first adventure. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists, and looked toward the pitch-black cave that was the dungeon entrance. And so, this white-haired, red-eyed youth, like countless other rookie adventurers harboring dreams, stepped onto this dangerous path. Bell looked at the dim cavern, able to see the ground clearly with the help of the fluorescent ores unique to the dungeon. The dim space and empty path were truly perfect for a horror movie. Bell's thoughts wandered slightly, lacking any of the fear one should have when entering the dungeon for the first time. Thump, thump. Several goblins rushed out from a corner, holding short wooden clubs in their hands. Bell glanced at his quiver but ultimately decided to settle it with his sword. Bell narrowed his eyes, the corners of his mouth curling up slightly. In his eyes, these goblins were nothing more than prey. Their threat was less than that of his teacher's attacks during training. The hunt begins. He whispered softly, his eyes flickering in the gloom. As the goblins rushed forward waving their clubs, the air was filled with their characteristic foul stench. Bell took a deep breath as his adrenaline surged, and time seemed to stretch at this moment. Let's see what the lowest level monsters in the dungeon are capable of. Bell tapped his toes lightly on the ground and dodged to the side. Squeak! The goblin in front missed its target and let out a piercing scream. A flash of sword light appeared, its cold glint radiating outward. With a flick of Bell's wrist, the blade sliced through the goblin's neck as if it were nothing. They feel much weaker than the wild boars in the forest. 1, Bell counted. The pupils of the remaining 2 goblins constricted sharply, and they instinctively took half a step back. They looked at each other and actually developed a bit of coordination, flanking him from the left and right. Oh, interesting. The smile in Bell's eyes deepened as he turned his sword, the silver light tracing a graceful arc in the air. However, you're too slow. The club snapped at the sound, and the second goblin stared in horror at its empty hands. Before it could react, it had already fallen to the ground. 2. Seeing that things were going poorly, the last goblin turned around, wanting to flee. But how could Bell give it that chance? He lunged forward, his blade cutting through the air and leaving a trail of silver light. 3. The 3 goblins fell neatly to the ground, and Bell hadn't even broken a sweat. Perfect. Bell sheathed his sword, then used a small knife to cut open the bodies and take out the magic stones. The monsters' color rapidly faded, their heads began to crumble, and their entire bodies started turning into dust, dissipating into the dungeon. He looked over his spoils with satisfaction. The magic stones in his bag shimmered under the light of the fluorescent ores. It seems coming here was the right choice. Bell said to himself. Monsters of this level are practically just giving me money. With an excited light shining in his eyes, he walked deeper into the labyrinth with a light step. This night was destined to be one full of gains. An excited light flickered in Bell's eyes, and a smile unconsciously played on his lips. He raised his hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead and took a deep breath, feeling the hot blood surging through his body. This really is an unexpected surprise, he whispered to himself, his gaze sweeping over the shimmering magic stones and various monster drops in his backpack. Although he had only lingered on the first and second floors, his haul far exceeded his expectations. Bell couldn't help but imagine the scene of exchanging these trophies for Valis. The clinking sound of gold coins seemed to already be ringing in his ears. However, the continuous fighting also made him feel a hint of fatigue. Without the blessing of a god's hearth, even he, who had trained since childhood, began to feel his physical strength failing. After a few more goblins and kobolds, I should retreat. Bell calculated silently, gripping the sword in his hand and warily looking around. Just then, a hurried sound of footsteps came from the distance. Bell immediately tensed his nerves, preparing for battle. Hey! Adventurer up ahead! An anxious voice called out, run! A group of berserk monsters is rushing this way. Bell was taken aback, then immediately realized the situation was bad. He quickly packed his backpack and ran toward the direction of the voice. What's going on? Bell asked while running. I don't know, a large group of monsters suddenly went berserk. The person answered while panting, just run, it'll be too late if you don't leave now. A wise man knows when to retreat, time to slip away. Bell followed the crowd of people rushing toward the exit, his heart pounding wildly, his ears filled with screams and the roars of monsters. In the chaos, a foot appeared out of nowhere, heading straight for Bell's ankle. He nearly lost his balance. A low curse escaped his throat, but his body reacted first, barely managing to steady itself. Behind him, an adventurer with a mocking expression accelerated and overtook him. Bell instantly understood the other party's intention. You want to leave me for the monsters. Bell clenched his teeth, a cold light flashing in his eyes. If it were the rookie Bell who had just entered the labyrinth, he would probably be lying on the ground by now, becoming a meal for the monsters. But now, he was no longer the person he used to be. Bell took a deep breath, exerted force with his legs, and suddenly accelerated. Amidst the panicked fleeing crowd, Bell was like a nimble fish, weaving through quickly. Before long, he caught up with the guy who had tried to sabotage him. Hey, you! Bell's voice was icy, sounding exceptionally piercing amidst the clamor. The man looked back, his face turning deathly pale in an instant. He hadn't expected Bell to catch up so quickly, nor did he expect this seemingly harmless white-haired youth to be so difficult to deal with. I didn't mean to. He stammered an excuse, but his feet didn't dare to stop. Bell only gave a cold snort. Don't you think it's a bit too late to say that now? As he spoke, he had already taken the longbow from his back. The movements were smooth and practiced. An arrow was notched on the string, pointing directly at the target. Hold breath, aim. The bowstring vibrated, and the arrow left the string. Ah! A shrill scream pierced the air. The arrow accurately hit the man's thigh. The consequences of a leg injury while fleeing were obvious. Bell didn't pause for a second, rushing forward in a few strides and pulling the arrow out before the man could make any reaction. Another scream followed, even more shrill than before. The man struggled to stand up, but Bell stepped down ruthlessly. He pinned him firmly in place. Blood gushed from the wound, staining the stone slabs beneath his feet red. Watching the other party struggle to get up and limp away, and seeing the monsters getting closer and closer behind him, Bell could imagine his end. There was no time to waste. Bell turned around and continued sprinting toward the labyrinth exit. Finally, he burst out of the labyrinth, taking large gulps of the outside air. Looking back, the last few adventurers also escaped in a sorry state, and the labyrinth gates slammed shut behind them. On the street, people were coming and going as usual, as if the life and death chase just now was merely an illusion. If one harms others in the labyrinth, they naturally must be prepared to pay the price. Other adventurers didn't care about such matters at all. Having earned materials, it was natural to exchange them for money, but Bell had forgotten one thing. Walking out of the guild's main gate, Bell gently patted his slightly bulging wallet, the corners of his mouth curling up unconsciously. This was the first income he had earned from adventuring alone. Although the amount wasn't large, it gave him a sense of immense satisfaction. It seemed the blood of his past life was awakening, the more money, the better. However, when asked about his familia, Bell stuttered and couldn't find the words. May I ask which familia you belong to? I don't seem to find any related information in the records. Aina, the guild clerk, keenly noticed the anomaly, her beautiful brows furrowing slightly. You couldn't have entered the dungeon all by yourself, could you? Seeing Bell's silent admission, Aina took a sharp breath, her voice rising unconsciously and drawing curious looks from those around them. Heavens! Do you know how dangerous that is? Without a familia's protection, without even the most basic hearth protection, if you were to encounter a monster swarm. She stopped halfway through, took a deep breath, and tried to calm her emotions. Sorry, I got too excited. Aina said softly, but this truly is too dangerous. As a guild clerk, I cannot stand by and watch you take such risks. She took a pouch of coins from behind the counter and handed it to Bell. This money is enough to support you until you find a suitable familia. Until then, please do not venture out alone again. Bell looked at Aina blankly, a wave of warmth washing over his heart. This guild clerk, whom he had only met a few times, actually cared for him so much. I understand, Miss Aina. Bell took the pouch with both hands and made a solemn promise. I will definitely find a suitable familia as soon as possible. Until then, I won't take risks lightly. Aina gazed at the stubborn youth before her. His eyes were clear and his tone firm, yet he couldn't hide a trace of loneliness between his brows. One more thing, Bell. Aina said softly, I don't know what kind of feelings you carry into the dungeon, but remember this phrase, adventurers must not take risks. Bell nodded heavily. These words sent ripples through his heart. An orphan in his past life and never having seen his parents in this one, Aina's concern made him feel a long-lost warmth. Watching Bell leave, Aina stared at the boy's thin but upright back. This pure and kind child must find a place where he belongs, she prayed silently in her heart. I walked around but didn't run into Goddess Hestia. Is she still with Hephaestus? It seems I arrived too early. Loki Familia had no plans to recruit newcomers, and the requirements of other familias were quite high. Bell wandered around looking for Hestia but couldn't find her. Although there was still the red light district, the pleasure quarter where Ishtar Familia was based, that place was still too early for Bell. So, what was Hestia doing? Hello, you look very strong. Would you like to join my familia? The voice was both youthful and full of energy. A goddess who looked like a 12-year-old girl with a petite build was looking at an elf with great anticipation. The elf sized up Hestia and asked, though it may be rude, Lady Goddess, what is your name? I am Hestia. Hestia Familia. I haven't heard of it. If it's a new familia, where is your headquarters? How many members do you have? Is your focus exploration or management? How much capital do you have? EH. Faced with the elf's rapid-fire questions, Hestia was at a loss. Seeing her complete inability to answer, the elf gradually realized something and narrowed her eyes. Then what is the familia's operational policy? That. Hope to earn money in the dungeon and come back, that sort of thing. Trying to laugh off her lack of planning, Hestia was met with a cold gaze from the elf, who turned her back on the undignified young goddess without even a farewell or a bow. As if saying she was wasting her time, the elf walked away. I was looked at like I was a piece of scrap paper. Even though she was a goddess, Hestia felt as if she had been struck. Whatever, this is just the beginning. As long as I keep trying to recruit, there will be. But as if the story of the goddess's failed recruitment had spread, Hestia's efforts yielded no results. Passers-by avoided her like the plague, some even quickening their pace to leave. Don't go. Our familia may have few people, but it's very warm. Hestia reached out with both hands in an exaggerated gesture to stop them, and we also have. She suddenly got stuck, seemingly racking her brain for some attractive advantage, but ultimately could only lower her head in embarrassment. Wah! A piercing cry echoed inside Hephaestus's shop. Pedestrians outside stopped one after another, peering curiously through the display window. In this shop famous for its fine equipment, the only one Hephaestus would tolerate such noise from was likely a deity with whom she shared a deep friendship. Hephaestus, why can't I find even a single familia member? Hestia sobbed, tears wetting her collar. Am I really that bad? Even that guy can find so many followers. Her voice was filled with grievance and indignation. The customers outside looked at each other and quietly backed away. No one wanted to step into the shop at this time. Offending a deity was not a wise move. Moreover, if they were caught by this goddess who didn't have a single follower, they would be caught in a dilemma. Join a weak familia with an uncertain future, or offend Hephaestus and lose the chance to obtain high-quality equipment. Hephaestus watched the crowd outside gradually disperse and sighed silently. She turned to look at her tearful friend, unsure for a moment how to comfort her. Hestia, enough, stop crying in my shop. How exactly have you been looking for members? Logically, no matter how bad a god was, they shouldn't be unable to find anyone. Even just standing at the guild's entrance should draw many people to join. I went and asked them one by one. After hearing Hestia's words, Hephaestus couldn't help but cover her face with her hand. However, Hestia had a dazed look on her face, as if saying, what? Is there a problem? In Hephaestus's mind, a picture involuntarily emerged of Hestia on the street, asking adventurers one by one if they were willing to join her familia. She couldn't help but lament in her heart. This girl is truly an idiot. No matter how anxious you are, you can't just go and ask like that. She finally understood why no one was willing to join Hestia's familia. Hestia personally going out to recruit was as absurd as a company CEO personally going onto the street to hire people. Wasn't this plainly telling those adventurers that her familia had no strength? Looking at Hestia's naive and innocent expression, completely failing to understand the situation, Hephaestus sighed. There was no choice, who else but Hestia was her good friend. She would just have to help her one more time. But unable to contain her irritation, Hephaestus directly reached out and pinched Hestia's cheeks, pulling them until they were bright red. Are you an idiot? Don't you know the simplest way for gods to find a familia is to register at the guild? And you went asking them one by one. She couldn't help but scold. Woo. I was wrong, so what should I do? Hephaestus. Hestia looked at her with teary eyes. Hephaestus covered her face helplessly. If she had known, she should have explained it clearly to this idiot. Now, the news of a foolish goddess searching for members on the street had likely already spread. Many adventurers probably already viewed Hestia as a terrifying beast and were avoiding her. She began to think of a countermeasure. The school district was impossible, they had visited 2 years ago, and with a 3-year cycle, it wouldn't open for some time. Going to other familias to find people who wanted to transfer was also unrealistic. Everyone moved towards the top. Who would move to the bottom? Would she have to look for members outside of Orario? After thinking for a long time, Hephaestus could only sigh and say, forget it, we'll take it one step at a time. She could only pray that there were still newcomers willing to join. It seemed she would have to go out and try her luck first. With her following along this time, it should be a bit better. In reality, Hestia was heading to the guild with Hephaestus, and they happened to miss Bel as he was leaving. When Aina learned that Hestia was about to form a familia and had no members yet, she thought of that rabbit-like boy and recommended him to Hestia. Hestia heard that he was a newcomer who had just entered the city and realized he probably hadn't heard of her name yet, so she hurriedly pulled Hephaestus along to find Bel. Ah, where is Bel? Hestia searched everywhere for the boy with white hair and red eyes, while Hephaestus teased her crossly. Now you're anxious. How were you so comfortable mooching off food and drinks in my shop before? Hestia's face turned red at the comment. How could the affairs of a god be called mooching? She rambled on with excuses, creating a cheerful atmosphere. My familia just left for an expedition, it's so boring. I might as well find some fun, hee hee. The guild hall was bustling with all kinds of adventurers coming and going. A red-haired goddess strolled boredly, her eyes narrowed into slits. She looked around, and suddenly her eyes lit up as she walked over with a mischievous grin. Hey, Hephaestus. Long time no see. Loki approached with a grin, intentionally ignoring the short figure nearby. Hestia looked at Loki, who was ignoring her, and said with annoyance, Hey, Loki, don't ignore me. Only then did Loki pretend to have just noticed Hestia, giggling behind her hand. Oh my, isn't this Hestia? You're so short I didn't see you just now, sorry. There was no apology in her voice at all. Hestia's anger continued to build. Oh, right, I heard earlier that some deity was actually wandering the streets trying to pull people into their familia. Someone who didn't know better would think they're a human trafficker. Hey, shorty, do you know anything about that? Curse you, Loki. Just you wait. I only have no one right now, but in the future, my familia will definitely be stronger than yours. Loki's eyes curved into crescent moons as she clutched her stomach, laughing uncontrollably. I didn't say that person was you. Having been in the lower world for so long and not having a single member in your familia, it's just too pathetic. To think a main god has to personally go out on the streets to recruit people, ha 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 ha. The SS. Hestia was sunk. You fool flat-chested goddess. Loki fell silent, glancing at her own flat chest and then at Hestia's pair of wobbling water balloons. Loki visibly turned red with rage, and then the two of them started brawling and trading insults. Shorty. Airstrip. The two goddesses went back and forth, their tongues like sharp swords. Loki mocked Hestia for having no familia, while Hestia countered by mocking Loki's flat chest. Their words grew sharper until it finally devolved into a physical altercation. Their relationship hadn't been good back in the heavens, and it remained the same now in the lower world. Hephaestus was left face palming on the side when she happened to spot a white-haired, red-eyed boy passing by. She quickly pulled Hestia out of the War of the Gods, and pointed in Bel's direction. Look. Hestia was still immersed in her scuffle with Loki until Hephaestus patted her head, prompting her to look over. White hair, red eyes, a boy, it all matches. My first Familia member, wait for me. Hephaestus offered an apology to a bewildered Loki and followed closely behind. The hustle and bustle returned to the guild hall, as if the little interlude had never happened. Loki was left scratching the back of her head with a confused expression. What is that shrimp up to? In the alley, the sunlight slanted across the mottled walls, casting long shadows on the ground. Looking at the two deities blocking his path, Hestia was urgently and repeatedly trying to persuade him to join her Familia. Belle looked confused, not understanding the situation at all. Hephaestus sensed the awkwardness and cleared her throat to explain, Belle, it's like this. Aina recommended you to Hestia, which is why she came to find you to join her Familia. So, Goddess Hestia came to ask me to join her Familia because Miss Aina recommended me. Hestia stood to the side, her hands nervously twisted together, her eyes flickering. She seemed to want to say something but didn't know where to start. Her past failed recruitment experiences haunted her like ghosts, making her hesitate. Hephaestus glanced at her flustered old friend and could only answer for her. Yes, that's right. If you're going into the dungeon, joining a Familia is indeed safer. However, she paused and looked at Belle with a gentle gaze. If you have other better options, we don't want to influence your decision for our own sake. Hestia got anxious, but Hephaestus didn't say anything, only holding Hestia's hand to signal her not to rush. Belle listened and nodded. In fact, his goal had been Hestia all along. His gaze lingered between the two deities for a moment before finally landing on Hestia. He took a deep breath and gave a sincere smile. Thank you very much, Goddess, for being willing to accept me. I promise to work hard and will never let you down. Upon hearing this, Hestia's eyes instantly burst with brilliant starlight. Her heart beat violently like a drum, as if it were about to leap out of her chest. Really? You're willing to join my Familia? Hestia's voice trembled slightly, unable to hide her excitement. Belle nodded solemnly, his eyes firm. Yes, Lady Hestia. It is my honor to become a member of your Familia. At this moment, Hestia could no longer contain her inner joy. She leapt forward lightly, her slender arms wrapping around Belle's neck. That's great. That's wonderful. Her voice was full of delight, as pleasant as the ringing of silver bells. Caught off guard, Belle felt a wave of softness and warmth press against him. Hestia's petite body was pressed tightly against his, and her soft long hair brushed against his cheek, bringing a tingling sensation. Belle could clearly feel Hestia's rising and falling chest, as well as the faint, elegant fragrance coming from her hair. This kind of intimate contact was an unprecedented experience for him, even across 2 lifetimes. A surge of heat emerged from his heart and quickly spread throughout his body. Belle's face instantly turned crimson, the heat spreading all the way to the base of his neck. His heartbeat suddenly accelerated, echoing in his chest like a drum. I will definitely work hard and never live up to Lady Hestia's expectations. Belle stammered, his voice filled with a bit of nervousness and shyness. Hestia released her embrace and looked up at Belle. Her deep blue eyes sparkled with relief and anticipation. Belle, from now on, you are my family. Hestia said softly, her tone filled with warmth. These words were like a warm current, instantly melting the loneliness in Belle's heart. He took a deep breath and nodded solemnly. Yes, Lady Hestia. I will use all my strength to protect our family. Watching this heartwarming scene from the side, Hephaestus couldn't help but let a smile curl on her lips. She cleared her throat, breaking the slightly romantic atmosphere. All right, that's enough mushiness. Hephaestus teased, Belle, welcome to the Hestia Familia. You'll have to take good care of this shorty from now on. Hearing this, Hestia's face turned red, and she glared at Hephaestus reproachfully. Hey, who are you calling a shorty? The three of them looked at each other and laughed, their voices echoing in the alley. After finishing her instructions, Hephaestus led the two of them to an old, dilapidated church. Hestia, you don't have a Familia headquarters yet. This can serve as your temporary base. Hephaestus said, pointing at the building in front of them. Moonlight pierced through the mottled window frames, casting layers of light and shadow inside the church. Bel raised his hand to wipe the wall, thick dust scattering at his fingertips. The wooden floorboards creaked under his footsteps. Hestia squatted in a corner, tidying up a few simple pieces of furniture. Though her movements were clumsy, she was exceptionally earnest. Bel. Hestia stopped what she was doing, her voice carrying a hint of hesitation. Do you think this place is too crude? Bel turned to look around, his gaze sweeping over the mottled walls and broken floorboards. It's fine here. As long as we tidy it up well, it can become a warm home. But other gods have magnificent headquarters. Hestia bit her lower lip, her voice growing smaller. Bel put down the rag in his hand and walked over to squat beside Hestia. Goddess, meeting you is my greatest fortune. Though this temple is simple, it carries our shared beginning. This meaning is far more important than any magnificent decorations. Under the moonlight, Hestia's eyes turned red. Really? She raised a hand to rub her eyes. Of course. Bel picked up a rag. Let's clean this place up together and make it a home that belongs to us. Hestia looked at the profile of Bel's face as he cleaned earnestly, feeling deeply moved. She silently picked up a rag and joined the cleaning effort. The two worked side by side, occasionally exchanging knowing glances. As time passed, the temple gradually regained its vitality. Hestia clapped her hands. Looking at the refreshed dwelling, the unease in her heart vanished without a trace. All right, now it's time to engrave the divine blessing on you, Bel. Are you familiar with the basic knowledge of the divine blessing? Bel thought back to the hearth knowledge Miss Aina had lectured him on after he went into the dungeon without permission, and answered honestly. Yes, I heard some things on the way to Orario, and Miss Aina explained it to me too. Status values go from I0 to S999. Once a value exceeds D500 and a Excelsia is achieved, you can level up. Some people also obtain skills and magic. While telling Bel to undress, Hestia explained. Exactly. The divine blessing is essentially a catalyst that develops the potential of the children of the lower world. The values produced by systematically parameterizing the hearth are the status values, which include basic abilities, developmental abilities, magic, and skills. The level indicates the overall degree of strength. She paused, looking at the snowy white back before her, and swallowed hard. Status values are conclusions gods have reached through long-term verification and analysis over these past 1,000 years. However, the children of the lower world possess infinite possibilities that even gods cannot fully discern. This is the unknown that even gods crave. In other words, all sorts of strange skills and magic are possible. Hestia's gaze fell softly on Bel, a complex light shimmering in her pure eyes. As an ancient goddess, she might have been unassuming and non-competitive in the heavens, appearing somewhat unremarkable, but at this moment, she keenly captured the deeply hidden longing in Bel's eyes. It was a craving for strength, a yearning for growth. Hestia sighed softly, recalling the days she spent freeloading at Hephaestus's place. During that time, she not only filled her stomach but also learned many secrets about familias through osmosis. Bel. She called out softly, her voice like a breeze brushing across a lake. I see your desire for strength. Bel was startled, then gave a slightly embarrassed smile. Did I make it that obvious? Hestia shook her head, her slender fingers lightly stroking Bel's cheek. No, you hit it well. But as your goddess, I can feel the fluctuations in your heart. She paused, her gaze softening. Bel, you must remember that strength isn't achieved overnight. In the past, too many people ignored the importance of the vessel in their rush to level up or achieve certain long-held wishes. Vessel. Bel tilted his head in confusion. Hestia nodded, her tone carrying a hint of solemnity. Yes, the vessel is like a container. And status values are the water that fills this container. Only when the container is completely full can you truly reach the state of sublimation. A trace of worry flashed in her eyes. Some people are too eager for success and force a level up before the vessel is full. The result of doing so is often losing the possibility of further development in the future. Bel nodded thoughtfully. Like filling a small cup halfway with water and thinking you've reached the peak. Hestia's eyes lit up. Exactly. You understand quickly. She smiled gratifiedly. I don't want you to become like that, Bel. You have infinite potential, I can feel it. But remember, haste makes waste. Belle took a deep breath and nodded solemnly. I understand, Lady Hestia. I will cherish this hearth and will not let down your expectations. Hestia looked at the determined youth before her. She knew that although she was a useless goddess, she had at least done the right thing in guiding Belle. Come, she said softly, let us begin engraving the divine blessing. This will be the first step on your path of growth, and the beginning of the bond between us. Witnessed by the moonlight, the contract between God and mortal was about to be forged, and a legend would unfold from here. Hestia pierced her finger with a needle and used divine blood to write the script of the gods, hieroglyphs, on Belle's back. As the hearth was engraved, Hestia looked at the hearth before her and cried out in surprise, it's a skill. Belle, come quickly and look. Hestia first locked the status values, then translated the hieroglyphs into the common tongue, recorded them on paper, and handed it to Belle. Belle hurriedly took the paper and looked down. Name: Belle Crenell. Level: LV.1. Status: Strength: I0. Endurance: I0. Dexterity: I0. Agility: I0. Magic: I0. Developmental abilities: Magic. Skills: Tempering Steel. Ultra Realm Enhancement of Physical and Mental Recovery, mental resistance significantly increased. Increases experience gain speed. The stronger the will, the greater the effect. Belle stared at Tempering Steel and the recovery enhancement on the skill panel. He inexplicably thought of how he had been beaten into a scurrying mess during his training, nearly giving up. By nightfall, his body had been completely unable to move. Even now, thinking back, he felt phantom pains. However, the experience bonus came at the perfect time and could replace Liera's freeze. This hard-won power would be the cornerstone of his journey into the future. Hestia put her hands on her hips, a proud smile spreading across her lips. To think there are 2 magic slots and even a skill. Although there's no magic yet, you truly are the first member of my familia. Belle, your talent is simply amazing. This is all thanks to the goddess. Hestia blinked and suddenly leaned close to Belle's ear, whispering, when you get stronger later, we'll go find that flat-chested goddess. Let's see if she still dares to look down on our Hestia familia. Flat-chested goddess. Belle thought to himself, could it be Loki? That's one of the strongest familias in Orario. HMPH. Hestia puffed out her cheeks. You have no idea how annoying that person is. She spends all day looking down on people just because her familia is powerful, especially. She subconsciously glanced at her own impressive figure, a hint of pride flashing across her face. Looking at Hestia's childish behavior, Belle couldn't help but smile. It was hard to believe such a lively and cute goddess had existed for billions of years. However, at the thought that Belle's skill should be classified as a rare skill, Hestia's excitement dampened. Perhaps due to their thirst for entertainment, the gods always had unique reactions to novel things in the lower world. Like children, they would do everything in their power to obtain and tamper with them, which would lead to a lot of trouble. At this thought, Hestia looked at Belle cautiously, her eyes very solemn. Remember, Belle, do not tell anyone about your skill, no matter who they are. This is your secret. If it's exposed, it will bring a lot of trouble and put you in danger. Belle had watched anime in his past life and understood that gods were basically fun seekers, so he indeed needed to be careful. As night fell, Belle stood in the simple kitchen, his kitchen knife moving as swift as lightning. The ingredients and the heat combined perfectly, and the aroma drifted out with the cooking smoke. Hestia leaned against the doorframe, tilting her head curiously as she watched the young man. She marveled inwardly. She hadn't expected this boy, who had just joined her familia, to possess such a hidden talent. Belle, your cooking skills are truly a pleasant surprise. Hestia couldn't help but praise him. To have such a high level of skill in the lower world isn't something one achieves just by chance. Hearing this, the corners of Belle's mouth curled up slightly. It is my honor to receive Lady Hestia's recognition. As the final dish was placed on the table, Hestia sat down impatiently. Her eyes sparkled like a kitten that had been hungry for a long time, and she quickly picked up a tender slice of meat and put it in her mouth. Hestia let out a satisfied sigh. Belle, your skill is simply a gift from the gods. I feel like I've found a treasure. Bel couldn't help but smile as he watched Hestia devouring the food. This goddess, who had lived for eons, was now like a gluttonous child, making it hard for him not to chuckle. After dinner, Hestia was in high spirits. Looking at the bedroom which had only one bed, she suggested sleeping together with Bel. Expectation shone in her eyes. Bel, let's sleep together tonight. That way, our bond will become even deeper. Bel's heart skipped a beat when he heard the suggestion. Hestia's impressive figure lingered in his mind. He suppressed his inner agitation and gave a light cough. Lady Hestia, I'm used to sleeping alone. If possible, I'd like to keep that habit. The smile on Hestia's face froze instantly upon hearing his words. She lowered her head, her disappointment plain to see. I see. I understand. Bel watched Hestia's lonely back, a mixture of emotions swirling in his heart. In the dead of night, Bel lay on the sofa, tossing and turning. Hestia's figure kept appearing in his mind, those bright eyes, that soft body. He shook his head vigorously to dispel these distracting thoughts. Focus, Bel, he whispered to himself. Don't be led astray by the temptation before you. You have more important things to do. Bel slowly closed his eyes, waiting for time to pass. Darkness shrouded the dilapidated church, and silence hung over the surroundings like a thick curtain. Bel blinked a few times and was about to get up, when he suddenly noticed something. Besides the bedsheets, there was something round leaning against him. It was very light, because he had trained with weights since childhood, he hadn't noticed this small amount of weight at all. Full of suspicion, Bel reached his hand toward the round object, and immediately realized it was Hestia. She was fast asleep with her face buried in Bel's chest. Bel was startled at first, and then he began to fret. Although he was confident he could leave the sofa without waking the goddess, how should he put it? In his past life, he was a hot-blooded young man, and now he was just 14, he didn't really want to let go of this warm and comfortable presence. This had already surpassed the highest grade body pillow, it was a divine tier body pillow. Though he still felt a certain amount of trepidation toward a deity, he couldn't help but gently hold her. A soft, squishy sensation was transmitted to him. This is bad. If I keep this up, I really won't want to leave. He couldn't help but ask himself, Bel, how can you be so depraved? Have you forgotten the oath you made before coming to Orario? While Bel was struggling internally, Hestia shifted slightly, causing Bel to react with reflexive speed. He had never moved so fast, gently shifting Hestia so she lay in his original spot, and then he escaped from the sofa. His heart was racing, nearly stopping from the fright. He covered Hestia with the bedsheet, hurriedly put on his bag, and snuck away. Every one of his movements was cautious, for fear of waking the sleeping Hestia. However, a deity's perception was far beyond that of a mortal. Hestia had long since noticed Bel's intentions, she simply chose to remain silent. Bel really is an idiot, After Bel left, Hestia crawled out from the warm covers and looked at the sofa beneath her in silence, her heart filled with mixed emotions. She was both proud of Bel's courage and worried about the danger he was about to face. But Hestia still supported Bel's decision. Although she didn't know what Bel was burdened with, as his guardian and family, she just needed to support him silently. Watching Bel depart, Hestia stood alone under the moonlight. She gazed in the direction where Bel had disappeared and prayed silently in her heart. Bel slipped silently into the dungeon, his white figure weaving through the darkness like a ghost. Tonight, I'm going to go all out, Bel whispered, a hint of excitement in his voice. His movements were swift and precise, every sword strike aimed directly at a vital point. The goblins and kobolds on the first floor were no match for him. Bel's movements were fluid, and every strike was perfectly accurate. The swordsmanship of a god was indeed formidable. The screams of goblins and kobolds rose one after another, but they were quickly swallowed by the dead silence. Too weak. Bel muttered to himself, a flash of disappointment in his eyes. Thinking of the effect of tempering steel, he likely needed enough pressure to temper his will. He needed stronger enemies, to go to a lower floor. The monsters on the second floor were clearly more challenging, but in Bel's eyes, they were just slightly larger targets. His figure wove through the monster mobs like a gust of wind. As he continued deeper, Bell's combat awareness became increasingly sharp. The monsters on the third floor were exceptionally fierce, but he seemed to have entered a wondrous state. His sword carved graceful arcs in the air, every strike landing exactly where it should. The monsters' roars echoed continuously, but they couldn't shake Bell in the slightest. When he stepped into the fourth floor, the surrounding air seemed to freeze. The elite monsters all turned their gazes toward this intruder, their eyes flashing with bloodthirsty light. Bell, however, was not afraid at all. Instead, he showed an expectant smile. Come on, let me see your strength. The battle erupted instantly, and Bell's figure moved through the monster mob like a fish in water. Every one of his movements was fluid, as if they had been practiced thousands of times. It doesn't feel as pressuring as when Master Leah is around. Thump. The ground shook, the walls cracked, and monsters emerged from both sides of the walls with blood-red eyes. It was clearly a monster party. Clang. Sword collided with monster claws, sparks flying. His cheek was scratched. Bell used the force to retreat, feeling the hearth on his back heating up. A flash of excitement crossed his eyes. Interesting, I feel great. Throughout the process, adventurers occasionally passed by, but they could only see a white figure flash past before disappearing into the darkness. The monster corpses and bloodstains on the ground silently told the story of this thrilling battle. The rampaging monsters that hadn't been pulled into the fight scared off other adventurers. Thus, the legend of the White Phantom began to spread among adventurers, with many speculating that people from the first or second tiers were dealing with a dungeon outbreak. But no one knew his true identity. They never imagined that a newcomer could easily slaughter all the monsters in the first 4 floors of the dungeon. Bell silently continued his training and experience, completely unaware that he had become a legendary figure in the dungeon. Early the next morning, while Hestia was still asleep, Bell slipped back to the base and prepared breakfast early. Then Bell prepared to go to the shops to look at weapons and armor. In last night's battle, he felt his original bow was a bit awkward to use, so he planned to switch to one with a higher draw weight and prepare some protective gear. Ryu, you have a letter. A gray-haired young girl trotted along in a cheerful mood, heading toward the kitchen with a letter in hand. The surrounding customers teased her merrily. Miss Sir, you're full of energy today as well. Sir turned and greeted the customers with a smile. Uncle Rainer, it's wonderful to have you patronizing us again today. Oh, just for that smile from Sir today, I'll take 10 more cups of wine. Someone nearby joked, you just want to drink more, don't you? Ha ha ha. The shop was filled with laughter and joy. The kitchen. Ryu, look. It's a letter from Solingen, the City of Swords. The City of Swords. It's from Goddess Estrella. Hearing the goddess's name, Ryu snatched the letter from Sir's hand. Her fingertips trembled slightly, her heart a mix of excitement and trepidation. She took a deep breath, trying hard to calm herself, but she couldn't help but unfold the letter and read it in a low voice. To Ryu, it has been a long time. Ryu, even as a deity, I still cannot let go of the past. Many years have passed since that time you asked me to leave. I have traveled many places and seen many people and stories. I heard you are doing well. I wonder if you have found your own path. Reading to this point, Ryu's voice involuntarily choked up, and her eyes turned slightly red. She paused for a moment, gently wiping the corners of her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to hide her emotions. However, a stubborn tear still quietly slipped down. Since the turmoil of that year, she no longer had any family. Memories flooded back like a tide. Ryu couldn't help but clench her fists, her nails digging deep into her palms. The one who should say sorry is me, goddess. Ryu whispered, her voice laced with deep self-reproach and frustration. If only I were stronger, perhaps I could have. Her words stopped abruptly, as if her throat were choked by painful memories. The letter in her hand was unconsciously gripped into several creases. Ryu's internal frustration surged like a river, never ending. Even after many years, Ryu still couldn't let go of that day. That terrifying monster had become the nightmare of her life. Ryu took a deep breath and continued reading. Bell is a child I was entrusted to teach. Although he hasn't joined my familia, I did teach him swordsmanship, and he acknowledges me as his master. He possesses an extraordinary will. Though he is not yet fully formed, his future achievements will not be low. I hope you can look after him if you have the capacity. After finishing the letter, Ryu silently folded the paper and carefully placed it in her bosom. She closed her eyes and took several deep breaths, trying to calm the waves in her heart. When she opened her eyes again, her face had returned to its previous expressionless state, with only the slight redness around her eyes betraying her inner turmoil. Sir had been standing by the whole time, watching Ryu's reaction. She stepped closer gently and patted Ryu's shoulder, silently conveying comfort and support. Ryu felt Sir's kindness. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly into a forced smile, as if saying, "I'm fine." "Is it here?" Bell held the map, which looked like a mess of scribbles, and looked at the shop in front of him. He remembered Hestia patting her chest and promising with absolute certainty. "This is a shop recommended by Hephaestus. It's filled with practice works made by her children. Although they're a bit inferior to official weapons, they far exceed the equipment on the market. Just give my name, and I'll let you see the friendship between Hephaestus and me, Bell." Pushing open the dilapidated shop door, the dim light inside made it hard for him to adjust at first, and the air was thick with the smell of dust. He poked his head in and asked, "Is anyone here? I'm here to buy equipment." His voice echoed in the empty shop. Bell stepped forward cautiously, his gaze sweeping over the mountains of various weapons and armor. Every item here seemed to be telling its own story, filling the young adventurer's heart with curiosity and longing. Suddenly, a loud bang shattered the silence. Thud. This was followed by a series of crashing sounds as items collapsed, like a small avalanche. Dust instantly filled the air, blurring Bell's vision. "Cough, cough, cough, are you okay?" Bell waved his hand to dispel the dust in front of him, trying to identify the source of the sound. Among a pile of collapsed armor, he saw a thick arm waving in vain. Bell immediately realized the urgency of the situation. Regardless of his own safety, he rushed forward. "Hold on, I'll help you." Bell shouted, his voice filled with concern and determination. He grabbed the hand and pulled outward with all his might. With a dull thud, Bell and the shopkeeper fell heavily to the ground together. The two of them scrambled up in a mess, patting the thick dust off themselves. Only then did Bell see clearly that the shopkeeper was a short but muscular dwarf. The dwarf owner sized Bell up with a sharp gaze, a hint of surprise and admiration flashing in his eyes. "Looks like you're still a novice adventurer, but you've got quite some strength." Bell was a bit embarrassed by the sudden praise and rubbed his head, laughing, "Hee hee." The dwarf owner patted Bell's shoulder, his eyes sparkling with appreciation. "You must be the newcomer from the Hestia Familia. Lady Hephaestus already gave me instructions. Follow me." The dwarf owner led Bell to a chest on the side, a somewhat mysterious smile on his face. He patted the chest, which made a dull sound. "Open it and take a look, young man. This is a set of equipment meticulously prepared for a newcomer." Bell couldn't wait to lift the lid, and the sight before him made him gasp. Soft armor, bracers, a helmet, a breastplate, greaves, combat boots, and an equipment belt, every piece radiated a heart-stirring luster. The dwarf owner noticed the sword at Bell's waist and the bow on his back, and his eyes lit up. "I see you use both a sword and a bow. Come, let's test your draw weight first to see what poundage of bow suits you." Without waiting for Bell to respond, the dwarf owner dragged him to a massive bow. This bow was a head taller than Bell, and the riser was carved with ancient and mysterious patterns. Looking at this behemoth, Bell couldn't help but give an awkward smile. He turned to look at the eagerly expectant dwarf owner, sighed helplessly, and stepped forward. He gripped the riser and placed his other hand on the string. Taking a deep breath, Bell began to apply force. His muscles tensed, veins bulged, and sweat slid down his forehead. The dwarf owner remained calm at first, but as Bell continued to apply pressure, his expression gradually turned to shock. When the bowstring was pulled to its limit, the dwarf owner's eyes were wide and round, and his mouth was slightly agape, clearly shocked speechless by the sight. "Stop! Stop! Stop! That's enough! That's enough!" The dwarf owner finally snapped out of it and hurriedly stopped Bell. He carefully inspected the already somewhat deformed riser, his face full of disbelief. "Kid, are you really not a dwarf or some other powerful race?" Or rather, could it be that you're some new humanoid monster from the dungeon? The dwarf owner shook his head, his tone full of praise. This kind of strength is far beyond the scope of an ordinary LV.1 adventurer. Generally, only certain races with extraordinary natural talents can possess such strength. Bell scratched his head awkwardly, not knowing how to explain. He couldn't exactly say that since he was little, he had trained with weights day after day to get stronger, so his strength naturally became great. He had even wrestled with wild boars. Seeing Bell's predicament, the dwarf owner smiled meaningfully. All right, I won't ask more. Everyone in Orario has their own secrets and past. This city always attracts all sorts of extraordinary people. The dwarf owner took a pitch-black longbow down from the wall and wiped it carefully. The bow was slender, a full 2 meters long, meticulously crafted from yew wood, with the limbs appearing a deep black. The bowstring was made from the tendon of some mysterious creature, gleaming with a unique luster under the sunlight. Bell took the longbow with both hands. This weapon, taller than himself, exuded a unique aura. He gently plucked the string, and a crisp vibration echoed in the shop. A wonderful feeling surged in his heart, as if this bow were tailor-made for him. This bow is really nice. Bell stroked the bow lovingly, his eyes full of joy. Seeing the boy cherish the weapon, the dwarf owner couldn't help but wipe his nose with his sleeve and let out a hearty laugh. As a former craftsman, his favorite thing was to see someone truly appreciate a weapon he recommended. I'll give you 100 arrows to go with it, come back to replenish them whenever you run out. The dwarf owner turned and took a bundle of arrows from under the counter. He placed the arrows on the counter, his gaze landing on the sword at Bell's waist. Young man, I see that sword of yours is quite good, so I won't recommend any other swords. The total is 50,000 valis. Your familia was just established, so you probably don't have much savings. Your patron goddess already gave instructions, take this equipment and use it for now, and pay the bill later when you have the money. Bell bowed deeply to the shopkeeper, his heart filled with gratitude. He carefully packed away his newly purchased weapons and armor and left the shop with a light step. Sunlight spilled onto Bell's face. He took a deep breath, feeling the excitement brought by the new equipment. He couldn't wait to head to the dungeon and test the power of these new weapons. Bell's mind had already begun to sketch out various combat scenarios. He imagined himself wielding the new weapons and engaging in fierce duels with monsters. This anticipation made his heart beat faster involuntarily. Walking on the road to the dungeon, Bell's hand occasionally stroked the bow in his hand. He could feel the cold touch from the sword hilt, as if it were telling of its sharpness. Bell thought to himself, I hope this new bow can help me face even stronger opponents. His eyes sparkled with light, and his steps became more determined. Approaching the dungeon entrance, Bell stopped and took a deep breath. He closed his eyes, carefully feeling the weight and texture of the new equipment, letting his body gradually adapt. A moment later, Bell opened his eyes, his gaze like fire. He clenched his fist and whispered to himself, come on, let's see what kind of power you can unleash. With a heart full of passion and expectation, Bell stepped toward the entrance of the dungeon. Big brother, white-haired big brother, do you need a supporter? Bell, who was heading towards the entrance of the dungeon, heard this call and turned to look in the direction of the voice. No one. Hey, down here, I'm down here. It was a Palom girl. A mess of chestnut-colored hair covered her neck, and those large, round eyes were distinctive. Upon closer look, she was really cute. Having seen the anime, Bell realized this was Lily. Huh, what was her full name again? Ah, sorry, I didn't notice you. Is there something you need? Big brother, would you like a supporter? I am a supporter with support skills. I can be of great help to an adventurer. Bell looked over Lily's small frame and large backpack, inwardly marveling that appearances can be deceiving. He nodded with a smile. All right, let's go on an adventure together. And so, Bell and Lily formed a party and entered the dungeon. They fought their way through obstacles and soon reached the 8th floor. Fierce killer ants were entrenched here, and Bell decided to try a bold strategy. As the battle unfolded, Bell deliberately let the ants' pincers graze his body. Sizzle. It felt like being pierced by a knitting needle, and the killer ants' formic acid produced a corrosive, burning sensation. That's right. Bell could have dodged this attack, but he wanted to test the upper limit of his skill's recovery ability, and besides, Lily was there. Having seen the anime, he knew Lily was essentially a kind-hearted child. If something went wrong, having a supporter nearby could at least call for help. Although it was a bit risky, he had prepared potions in advance, so he wasn't worried about problems. Moreover, the odds were good. It was the perfect time to test the skill's limits. Surprisingly, his wound began to heal. Though slow, he could still feel it. There was a tingling, itchy sensation at the wound. Not only that, he felt his stamina recovering as well. Is this the power of will? Bell murmured to himself, the stronger the will, the stronger the recovery ability. With sufficiently strong willpower, perhaps one could drag a battle into a war of attrition. I feel like it can work. Bell's face was full of excitement. Lily, who was collecting magic stones nearby, watched dumbfounded as Bell kept getting injured and recovering, her feelings complicated. She thought to herself, is he really different from those other despicable adventurers? This trip to the dungeon went smoothly for Bell. Without the hassle of needing to collect magic stones and dropped items, he could just focus on fighting. It felt great. After the battle ended, Bell noticed Lily stealing glances at him. A thought struck him, remembering Lily's habit of theft. Before leaving the dungeon, he checked his equipment and money, confirming nothing was missing. Lily, this is today's payment. After exchanging money at the guild, Bell handed her a bulging money pouch. You helped me a lot. You deserve it. Lily was stunned. Feeling its hefty weight, this stood in stark contrast to other adventurers who looked down on supporters and didn't even intend to pay them. Lily, who had intended to steal the money but failed, felt a flicker of guilt in her eyes. She lowered her head and said softly, "Thank you, big brother." As they left the dungeon, Bell parted ways with Lily. Watching Lily enter an alley, the few people who had been following them all along quickly followed after her. Seeing their heavy dark circles, Bell thought of the frequent extortion incidents within the Soma Familia. Bell took a black robe from his backpack, changed out of his soft armor, covered his conspicuous white hair with the hood, and used a mask he casually bought on the roadside to hide his face. Then he quietly followed Lily. Sure enough, he saw several Familia members surround her and begin extorting her. Brat, hand over today's earnings. I saw you made money today. Lily trembled, clutching the money pouch tightly. This is mine. Stop it. The leading man snatched it away. Seeing Lily still trying to reach for it, he kicked her, and the Palam's body went tumbling away. Opening the pouch and looking at the glimmering valise, he glared viciously at Lily. Just this much. Looks like that kid was a pauper too. After those few left, Bell quickly acted. He threw on a cloak, covered his face, and silently followed that group of Familia members. In a secluded alley, he suddenly struck. They were just a bunch of level 1 adventurers whose bodies had been hollowed out, posing even less threat than a group of goblins. He subdued them all in a few swift moves. He searched them, taking all the money they had. Counting it, he sneered. With just this much to your name, you'd better get out of Orario. Don't be adventurers, this place isn't for you. Then he turned and navigated the alleys, returning to Lily's side. He saw her curled up in a corner, sobbing. He gently approached and placed the money pouch in front of her. Don't cry, little fellow. I taught those guys a lesson. No one can bully you now. With that, Bell turned and left, leaving a stunned Lily gazing at his retreating back, tears of gratitude and hope shimmering in her eyes. Ryu stood in the shadows in the distance, silently observing Bell's every move. Her eyes revealed surprise and approval as she privately pondered the actions of this white-haired youth. Bell decisively subdued the Familia members bullying Lily, displaying a strong sense of justice. This sent Ryu's thoughts drifting back to the past, when the Astria Familia was still around. They often fought for justice and aided the weak, a symbol of order in Orario. Looking at Bell before her, a glimmer of hope welled up in Ryu's heart. As the goddess's disciple, perhaps he would bring about a different change in Orario. I'll help him a bit. Ryu stood on a balcony, overlooking Orario's nightscape. In her hand was a piece of intelligence detailing the Soma Familia's recent money-grabbing activities. This valuable intelligence came from Sir's commission, obtained through an investigation by a blonde elf adventurer who wished to remain anonymous. As the night deepened, Ryu, like a ghost, stealthily infiltrated the Soma Familia's stronghold. Her nimble figure moved through the shadows, easily avoiding the notice of all the guards. She effortlessly reached the deep interior of the Familia, the leader's office. Pushing the door open gently, before her eyes was the leader of the Soma Familia, nicknamed the Wine Keeper, Xanis Lustra. Seeing the suddenly opened door, Xanis sharply looked up, alertly demanding, "Who's there?" However, before he could react, Ryu closed in like lightning. A flash of cold light. Xanis felt a chill on his cheek as a line of blood slid down his face. Ryu coldly tossed the intelligence detailing the Soma Familia's many misdeeds in front of Xanis. A green-clad elf, and that weapon. It was the wanted criminal, Gale. Glancing at the intelligence and thinking of Gale's past methods, cold sweat dripped from Xanis. What do you want? One day. Solve the problem. Otherwise, you understand. Ryu's tone was calm yet carried an unquestionable authority, warning the panicked Xanis. Fine beads of sweat broke out on Xanis's forehead. If it were someone from the guild, there were ways to use laws and money to solve the problem. But facing a criminal wanted by the guild, the Gale, who had destroyed many dark familias, those methods were completely useless. Moreover, the Soma Familia itself wasn't clean, so he could only nod in agreement. Ryu didn't care whether Xanis solved the problem or not. If not, she would just destroy them. The rest I'll leave to Belle. But as the goddess's disciple, he needs more training so as not to disgrace Lady Estrella. A few days later, the Soma Familia's money-grabbing activities indeed became much more restrained. At the very least, the guild received far fewer reports about the Soma Familia. However, the bounty figure for Gale on the reward notice board climbed once again, now prominently displaying the astronomical sum of 100 million valis. Passing adventurers stopped one after another, discussing this astronomical figure. This wealth, enough to keep an ordinary person comfortable for generations, highlighted the undercurrents surging within this city. As night fell, Goddess Hestia sat in the simple basement, looking at the hearth on Belle's back. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and injected divine blood into it. The numbers on the hearth began to jump, finally settling on a surprising set of figures. Name: Belle Crenel. Level: LV.1. Status values: Strength: I0, greater than F367. Endurance: I0, greater than E432. Dexterity: I0, greater than F351. Agility: I0, greater than E465. Magic: I0. Hestia opened her eyes. How could it have increased so much? Counting the increase excluding magic, the other values totaled 1615, it was truly divine shocking. Belle saw Hestia's solemn expression. Goddess, did something happen? Hestia looked up, her gaze staring intensely at Belle. Belle, tell me, what have you experienced over the past 2 days? Belle hesitated for a moment before starting to recount his adventures. This included the battles in the dungeon and dealing with those few from the Soma Familia. Of course, the danger of the combat was glossed over. When he mentioned rescuing the Palom Lily and subduing that group of bullying adventurers, Hestia's brow furrowed tighter and tighter. Hestia was silent for a moment, then suddenly stood up. That's Soma Familia. To actually do such a thing. She said indignantly, fire flashing in her eyes, I'm going to find that gloomy shut-in and ask for an explanation. Belle hurriedly grabbed Hestia's arm. Wait, goddess. He said urgently, the Soma Familia is a large familia with a scale of 100 people. Although they are mostly level 1, they also have 2 level 2 adventurers. Our current strength isn't enough, acting rashly might backfire. Then why did you get involved in the Soma Familia's business, Belle? Do you know how dangerous that was? Hestia's voice carried a hint of reproach, you're still too young, and you're not strong enough. If you charge into dungeon battles so recklessly, what will you do if you encounter danger? If you conflict with people from other familias, what if they retaliate against you? As she spoke, Hestia's eyes welled up with tears. Belle lowered his head and muttered softly, just those few weaklings. But seeing Hestia's worried look, Bell changed his tune. I know what I did might bring trouble, but I don't regret it. That little girl needed help, and I couldn't just stand by and watch. Hestia sighed and walked over to Bell. I understand your desire to help others, but you also have to consider your own safety. You are the only member of my familia, if something happened to you. Bell looked up at Hestia's worried eyes. Having never dealt with such a situation, he felt a wave of panic inside. I'm very sorry for making you worry, goddess. But please believe me, I will become stronger. Hestia gazed at Bell's determined eyes and finally shook her head helplessly. You. She reached out and lightly patted Bell's shoulder. Remember, no matter what happens, prioritize your own safety. We are family, your well-being is my concern. Bell nodded solemnly, his eyes shining with gratitude and resolve. I understand, goddess. I will be more cautious. Hestia looked at the stubborn boy before her, feeling both relieved and worried. She knew that Bell's compassion and sense of justice were the foundation of his future, but they would also bring him dangerous disasters. As the first light of dawn appeared, Bell woke up early, organized his equipment, and hurried to the Orario's central plaza. His heart was full of anticipation, wanting to team up with Lily for an adventure again. Although he didn't plan to rashly barge into the Soma Familia, he firmly believed that through hard work, he could definitely help Lily earn enough money to buy her freedom. The plaza was bustling, with adventurers gathered in small groups, discussing today's itineraries. Bell looked around but never saw Lily's figure. He frowned, a trace of unease rising in his heart. Could Lily be in trouble again? Bell murmured to himself, deciding to ask around. He shuttled back and forth across the plaza, asking familiar faces, but no one had seen Lily. Just as Bell was about to give up, he suddenly saw a familiar figure walking toward the dungeon entrance with another team. Lily. Bell's eyes widened in surprise. He instinctively wanted to chase after her but hesitated. Yesterday's events were still fresh in his mind, and Bell wasn't sure if Lily was still willing to team up with him. More importantly, he didn't want to bring Lily more trouble. Bell stood where he was, watching Lily's back gradually disappear into the dungeon entrance. Maybe this is better for her. Bell comforted himself. However, Bell didn't know that Lily had actually recognized him. In the alley that day, although Bell was well disguised, Lily's sharp sense of smell had still captured his scent. Today, Lily had intentionally avoided Bell, not because she wasn't grateful for his help, but because she didn't want to bring more trouble to this kind boy. Bell took a deep breath and decided to head down into the dungeon alone. Even though he couldn't team up with Lily, he still persisted in his goal, to become stronger. Hestia's words from last night kept surfacing in Bell's mind. He knew he had to be more cautious. Then, he stepped into the dark dungeon. Bell walked into the depths of the dungeon alone. Since his last experience where he didn't need to worry about cutting monster bodies to retrieve magic stones, he felt somewhat unaccustomed to being without a supporter's help. The collection of magic stones and drop items became slow and difficult, but he did not give up. Every swing of the sword and every dodge made him more determined in his resolve. His white short hair was soaked with sweat, sticking to his forehead in a messy tangle. Bell's white light armor was covered in monster blood and dust, its originally bright surface now dull and lusterless. His right hand gripped his knife tightly, the blade still bearing traces of his last battle. Bell's legs trembled slightly from the long hours of exertion, every step felt like he was carrying a heavy burden. Despite this, his eyes remained steady, flashing with an unyielding light. Nearly 10 hours later, even Bell, with his powerful recovery skills, was exhausted to the point of collapse. Today, Bell had scoured the first 8 floors of the dungeon. Every swing and every dodge had made his techniques more refined. Although such behavior might affect the earnings of other lower-level adventurers, he knew that only through such relentless effort could he quickly improve his strength. Furthermore, Bell now knew the limits of his abilities, which would help his development. The sunlight stung his eyes, and he squinted to adjust to the outside light. Just then, he heard a sound of arguing. You scoundrels! What about the agreed-upon reward? A shrill voice called out. Bell turned to look and found a group of adventurers bullying a supporter. That supporter was none other than Lily. Bell's heart tightened, and he instinctively wanted to rush forward. But he suddenly remembered Hestia's advice and stopped in his tracks. He looked around and saw several enforcers from the Ganesha Familia standing not far away. Bell took a deep breath and quickly walked toward them. Mr. Enforcer, there are people over there using their power to bully others. Bell said in a low voice, pointing in the direction of the argument. The enforcers nodded and immediately went into action. Soon, the troublemaking adventurers were dispersed, and Lily also got back a portion of the reward she deserved. Bell stood in the distance, watching it all. He noticed Lily's gaze sweep over him, but she quickly looked away. Bell hesitated for a moment but still walked over. Are you all right, Lily? He asked softly. Lily looked up, a trace of complex emotion flashing in her eyes. Why meddle in other people's business? If it weren't for you, I might have taken all their money. Bell was stunned for a moment, then revealed a gentle smile. Lily, I understand your situation is difficult. But if the means are wrong, even if the goal is right, it's hard to get the right result. Lily lowered her head, remaining silent. Bell continued, let's work hard together. Next time we go to the dungeon together and earn rewards legally. This way, it's not only safe, but it also lets you reach your goal faster. What do you think? Lily looked up, hesitation and hope shining in her eyes. Finally, she nodded lightly. All right, it's a deal. Bell smiled and reached out his hand. We'll go to the dungeon together next time. Lily hesitated for a moment, then also reached out her small hand. The two hands gripped together, as if at this moment, they had established some special connection. As the sun set, Bell and Lily walked side by side on the way back. Hestia sat in the small room of the basement, holding a cup of hot tea, her brows furrowed. She thought repeatedly about Bell's situation, her heart filled with contradiction and worry. Bell, what on earth should I do? Hestia murmured to herself. Just as she was lost in thought, a light pitter-patter of footsteps interrupted her musings. Looking up, she saw her good friend Hephaestus pushing the door open and entering. What's wrong, Hestia? You look like you have a lot on your mind. Hephaestus asked with concern. Hestia sighed and put the cup on the table. It's about Bell. I don't know how to help him grow. Hephaestus sat down beside Hestia and gently patted her shoulder. Tell me what happened. Maybe we can figure something out together. Hestia told Hephaestus everything about Bell's recent experiences and her concerns. As she spoke, her emotions gradually calmed down. After listening, Hephaestus pondered for a moment and then said with a smile, You know, Hestia, sometimes being too anxious can be counterproductive. Hestia looked at her friend in confusion. Hephaestus continued, Bell is a child with potential. Maybe we should give him some space to let him figure things out and grow on his own. But, Hestia started to say something but stopped. Believe in your familia, Hestia. Hephaestus said gently but firmly. Observe Bell's actions first. He might give you a surprise. Hestia was silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. You're right. I should have faith in Bell. Listening to Hestia's description, Hephaestus thought of the youth she had met before, with his resolute eyes, and marveled that Hestia had found such a promising prospect. For some reason, she thought of Welf, who had been lectured by Tsubaki today because he had beaten up a customer. The two goddesses looked at each other and smiled, and the atmosphere in the room became relaxed. Hestia stood up, determination flickering in her eyes. Thank you, Hephaestus. I will wait patiently and see how Bell grows. Hephaestus nodded with a smile. That's the Hestia I know. Remember, as gods, our most important role is to guide, not to control. The two goddesses looked at each other and smiled, jointly looking forward to Bell's future performance. Bell sat alone in his room, gazing at the night sky outside the window. He sighed softly, secretly pondering his next plan. If he really wanted to help Lily, there were better ways than saving money to buy her freedom. The next morning, Bell woke up early and began even more rigorous training. He brandished his short sword, repeating basic movements over and over again. Sweat trickled down his cheeks, but he didn't care. I must become stronger. Bell murmured to himself, a firm light flashing in his eyes. In the morning, Bell went to the Adventurers Guild to ask for news about the Loki Familia. He hoped to find Finn and explain Lily's situation to him. Given Finn's level of importance placed on dwarves, he would surely help, or at least find a way to help Lily escape her misery. However, the answer he received made his heart sink. Loki Familia. The girl behind the counter tilted her head and replied, "They went on a dungeon expedition a few days ago. They probably won't be back for a while." Bell clenched his fists, his disappointment plain to see. He turned and left the guild, his mind already thinking of other ways. 10 days passed, and Bell continued his efforts. Every time he entered the dungeon with Lily, he became stronger every day. He knew that only by constantly improving himself could he truly help those around him. And this was exactly the most important lesson on his path to growth. This day, Bell was focused on brandishing his short sword, sweat soaking his clothes. Suddenly, a green figure flashed before him. It was a green-haired elf who attacked immediately without saying a word. Bell reacted quickly and immediately raised his sword to parry. The two went back and forth, sword light flashing. However, the gap in strength was too great, and Bell soon fell into a disadvantage. The elf's offensive became more and more fierce, and Bell was hit in several places. The pain stimulated his nerves, and the tempering steel skill was triggered. Bell gritted his teeth, determined to give it his all. Just as he was preparing to launch a counterattack, the elf's sword came with a fierce momentum. Bell wanted to parry, but found that his movement was a beat too slow. The blade sliced through the air, heading straight for Bell's chest. Oh no! Bell was startled, but it was too late. The edge of the sword struck Bell heavily, and the massive impact sent him flying. Bell's back hit the wall hard, and his head also slammed into the hard stone wall. Intense pain instantly swept through his whole body, and his vision gradually blurred. Why did it happen like this? Bell tried hard to stay conscious, but darkness soon swallowed his awareness. After an unknown amount of time, Bell slowly opened his eyes. What met his eyes was an unfamiliar room. He looked around blankly, his mind in a state of chaos. "You're awake. Now you're a cute girl." Bell hurriedly looked down at himself. Then a silly giggle came from the side. It was a waitress with pale silver hair. If one just looked at that incredibly sweet smile, it would probably be hard to imagine this person's true identity. Her public identity was Sir Flover, the poster girl of the hostess of fertility, but in reality, she was the primary goddess of Warario's strongest familia, Freya. Realizing her identity, Bell's eyes tightened, and he immediately wanted to flee. The black-haired cat person maid, Chloe Rollo, hurriedly held him down and tapped Bell on the head. "Stupid youth, we aren't kidnappers, and you aren't worth much anyway, meow tilde." Chloe Rollo probably thought Bell took them for kidnappers, but in reality, Bell was just worried whether Sir, the goddess Freya's disguise, would care about his soul like in the original story. But thinking about it, having lied here for so long, she had probably seen everything she needed to see. After confirming that Sir didn't have a particularly fervent gaze, Bell breathed a slight sigh of relief. "Where is this? How did I end up here?" Bell murmured to himself. Although he had a guess, he couldn't reveal it directly. Chloe looked at Bell, but her eyes kept drifting toward Bell's buttocks. "This is the lounge of the hostess of fertility, white-haired youth. You were accidentally knocked unconscious by the useless elf." "Oh, the useless elf is that one over there who's currently wallowing in self-isolation, meow tilde." Following the direction of her finger, Bell looked over. An elf wearing the same uniform stood in the corner, being scolded by a human girl. "Useless elf, if it was just training, how did you manage to knock someone unconscious?" Bell wanted to ask, but found his throat was terribly dry. He swallowed hard, and his gaze inadvertently met the elf's. Ryu glanced at Bell, her tone carrying a hint of apology. "It seems I underestimated your level of fragility. However, I will do what I promised the goddess. Since you're awake, let's continue the training." Bell looked at Sir cautiously, and seeing that she wasn't paying much attention to him, he couldn't help but feel secretly relieved. Sir was explaining the misunderstanding to Bell. It turned out that Ryu had been entrusted by Bell's teacher, Estrella, the goddess of justice, to look after him. He had his suspicions back then, but only now was it officially confirmed that teacher Leah, who taught him swordsmanship, was actually Estrella, the goddess of justice. Bell's heart was filled with mixed emotions, both surprised by his teacher's true identity and grateful for her diligent guidance. He wanted to ask Ryu about his teacher's whereabouts and recent situation, but Ryu's answer was that she only knew the great god was in the capital of swords, and she wasn't sure about anything else. Ryu looked at Belle with a complex expression, a hint of guilt and determination flashing in her eyes. Rested enough. Then continue the training. Belle hadn't fully recovered yet, but he didn't want to disappoint Ryu, so he forced himself to stand up. However, the results of the training were not satisfactory. Most of the time, he was retreating steadily under Ryu's attacks, looking quite pathetic. Furthermore, Ryu basically didn't know her own strength, and Belle was beaten until he was covered in injuries. Useless elf, meow, the cat girl evaluated mercilessly. These words were like thorns, deeply stinging Ryu's pride. Seeing Ryu's dejected look, Belle couldn't help but speak up to comfort her. Miss Ryu, thank you for being willing to train me. I will work even harder. As he spoke, he subconsciously grabbed Ryu's arm. Ryu was stunned, looking down at Belle's hand, a sudden wave of warmth surging in her heart. This was the third person to directly grab her hand without being rejected. At that moment, she seemed to see the shadow of her former captain overlapping with Belle. You. Ryu started to say something but stopped, eventually letting out a sigh. She gently patted Belle's shoulder. Rest for a while. We'll change the method later. Belle nodded and was about to let go, but he found that Ryu didn't pull away. The two of them remained in an awkward standoff for a few seconds until Sir suddenly appeared beside them. Oh my, it seems our Ryu has reached the age of love tilde, Sir teased, a playful glint in her eyes. Belle let go as if he'd received an electric shock, his face instantly turning bright red. He stammered an explanation. And no. Ryu was also a bit flustered, but she quickly regained her composure. She gave a light cough and said with feigned seriousness, Sir, don't make such jokes. We were just training. A sly smile curled at the corners of Sir's mouth. Is that so? Then I'll have to take a good look at your training. Let me try, meow, the cat girl suddenly chimed in, taking over Belle's training and unceremoniously performing a back throw. Belle instinctively dodged, but he was injured and his status values were far behind, so he couldn't avoid it. Thus, Belle was slammed hard onto the ground. However, to everyone's surprise, Belle's injuries recovered at a rapid pace. What's going on? Ryu asked in surprise. Belle simply explained. This is one of my skills. He didn't explain in detail, and the others didn't press him. An adventurer's hearth abilities were secrets, and they weren't yet close enough to trust each other with their lives. Several LV.4 adventurers, whose strength reached the second tier, took turns training Belle. Their strength far exceeded Belle's, but because of this, the training method brought immense pressure and also served to hone his will, giving Belle huge room for improvement. Belle's amazing recovery ability became the key to the training. As long as he didn't suffer major injuries, he would quickly recover and continue to take on more challenges. Ryu's training method was relatively gentle. She seemed to be trying to control her power to ensure she didn't cause excessive harm to Belle. However, the others' training methods weren't so polite, especially that cat girl. Her attacks were sharp and merciless. Belle felt that, besides Ryu, the others seemed to be venting their suppressed nature from being waitresses. After learning about his ability, they treated him like an unbreakable punching bag, ravaging him to their heart's content. But even so, Belle had no complaints. He knew clearly that this high-intensity training was exactly what he needed. The effects of the training soon became apparent. From barely being able to withstand his opponent's attacks, Belle gradually became able to find opportunities to counterattack during the training. Although he knew these high-level adventurers were suppressing their strength, the techniques they had honed through countless battles could not be hidden. Belle was like a gem waiting to be polished. Under the carving of these experts, his potential was being stimulated bit by bit. Every time he was knocked down, Belle would quickly scramble up, an unyielding fighting spirit burning in his eyes as he continued to meet the next round of challenges. In the process, Belle learned many combat techniques. Acquired boxing technique LV.1, grappling technique LV.1. Already possessed swordsmanship, boxing, grappling, and archery, integrated into martial arts practice, obtained martial arts practice LV.2. Current panel. Bell. Cooking LV.6, Intuition LV.6, Age of Gods Swordsmanship LV.6, Age of Gods Archery LV.5, Trap Making LV.3, Martial Arts Practice LV.2, Stealth LV.2, Item Creation LV.1, Pharmacy LV.1. Sir stood by the window, her eyes shining with a purple glow, her gaze never leaving Belle. She murmured to herself, "This child's soul is undergoing a transformation, gradually becoming dazzling from gray. It's so beautiful, but unfortunately, it's not the soul I'm looking for." Night fell quietly, and the exhausted Bell dragged his heavy steps back to his residence. He let out a long breath, slowly sat on the edge of the bed, and closed his eyes to feel the results of the day's training. Suddenly, Bell snapped his eyes open, and an uncontrollable excitement surged in his heart. Seeing Hestia there, he hurriedly pulled her to update his status values. Hestia copied the status values onto paper. Looking at the status values, Bell's heart raced, and his fingers trembled slightly. Divine Blessing. Name: Bell Crenell. Level: LV.1. Status values: Strength: F367 to C671. Endurance: E432 to A843. Dexterity: F351 to B756. Agility: E465 to C666. Magic: I0. Is this real? Bell murmured to himself, his eyes shining with the light of pleasant surprise. His various abilities had generally reached rank C, exceeding the minimum rank D required for a level up. Bell couldn't help but cheer, spinning around in the small room. At this moment, all his fatigue vanished, replaced by infinite joy and anticipation. Although he didn't remember when the original Bell reached these values, it had only been about 10 days now. There was hope to push for a level up within the next 20 days. However, just as Bell was immersed in joy, a blurry thought suddenly entered his mind. He frowned, trying to recall something. Strange, I feel like I've forgotten something important. Bell scratched his head, talking to himself in confusion. Meanwhile, at the entrance of the dungeon, a small figure was pacing back and forth anxiously. It was a Palom girl, her large eyes filled with worry and doubt. Achoo! The Palom girl suddenly sneezed and rubbed her nose. She looked up toward the depths of the dungeon and whispered softly, "Why didn't Master Bell come to the dungeon today?" The next morning, Bell arrived at the dungeon entrance, rubbing his sleepy eyes. From a distance, he saw a small figure pacing back and forth. Oh no! Bell slapped his forehead, finally remembering yesterday's promise. Lily stood with her hands on her hips, glaring at Bell crossly. "Master Bell, where were you yesterday?" "I'm sorry, Lily." Bell bowed quickly in apology. "I ran into some trouble yesterday." Lily turned her head away and mumbled softly, "HMPH, as if I care." Bell scratched his head and laughed awkwardly, how about I treat you to some honey pudding to make it up to you?" Lily's eyes lit up instantly, but she quickly feigned composure. "Fine, I suppose I can reluctantly forgive you." The surrounding adventurers saw this scene and couldn't help but snicker behind their hands. Hey, you don't think that little girl has a crush on that rookie, do you?" An older adventurer said with a wink. His companion laughed and gave him a shove. "Don't talk nonsense, they're clearly like siblings, aren't they?" Lily suddenly leaned in close to Bell, scrutinizing his face. "Master Bell, why do you look so pale?" Bell instinctively took half a step back and stammered, well. Lily narrowed her eyes, her tone suspicious. "You didn't go off and do something dangerous, did you?" Bell waved his hands frantically. No, it's just that an elder found a powerful adventurer to help me train. It was just that the senior was a wanted criminal." Lily nodded tentatively, though the worry in her eyes didn't completely fade. "Then let's go on an adventure together today," Lily said excitedly, her small hand suddenly grabbing Bell's sleeve. Bell smiled and agreed, inwardly relieved that he hadn't mentioned Ryu. The two walked into the dungeon chatting and laughing, while someone in the crowd behind them followed stealthily. Bell and Lily fought their way through and finally reached the 10th floor of the dungeon. They shared a smile and prepared to move forward, but suddenly felt the air around them freeze. An ominous aura quietly spread. Bell alertly scanned his surroundings and gripped his sword tightly. Lily, be careful. Bell warned in a low voice. Before he could finish his sentence, swarms of monsters poured in from all directions in unprecedented numbers. Bell instantly realized this wasn't a normal encounter, but an organized monster riot. He quickly charged toward the nearest group of monsters, his dagger slashing like lightning, each strike precisely hitting a vital spot. Lily was not to be outdone, her crossbow bolts firing continuously, repelling wave after wave of monsters. The two stood back to back, coordinating with perfect chemistry. Bell primarily faced the brunt of the monster tide, struggling against the endless enemies, while Lily provided support, constantly observing the surroundings to prevent monsters from ambushing them from other directions. The battle lasted for a long time. Both Bell and Lily were exhausted but still held their ground. Sweat beaded on Bell's forehead. If he were alone, escaping would be quite simple, and even taking Lily with him wouldn't be a problem. But Lily looked at the loot they had gathered in her backpack with an expression of reluctance to leave it behind. However, the monsters soon felt the resistance here was too strong and charged in another direction. Just as Bell thought victory was in sight, an accident occurred. A swarm of bats rushed out, obscuring Bell's vision, while an orc charged toward Lily. Before he could react, his body moved before his mind, and he instinctively lunged toward Lily. Watch out! Bell shouted. However, the monster's impact far exceeded Bell's expectations. The powerful shockwave separated the two, and Bell was thrown violently to the side. When he struggled to his feet, Lily was nowhere to be seen. Lily! Bell cried out at the top of his lungs, but the only response was the roaring of monsters. He endured the pain in his body. The hearth on his back was still pulsing with heat, dulling the pain and making his body feel a sense of lightness. But Bell only desperately searched for Lily's figure in the chaos, his heart filled with self-reproach and worry. Meanwhile, Lily had been pushed in another direction by the shockwave. She shook her head, trying to clear her mind. Just then, her sharp eyes caught sight of a suspicious figure. That person was skulking around a dark corner of the dungeon, looking around from time to time. Lily recognized the signature clothing of the Soma Familia, and alarm bells immediately went off in her head. She followed quietly, carefully maintaining her distance. The person traversed the intricate tunnels and finally stopped in front of a hidden cave. Lily held her breath, hiding behind a protruding rock. Suddenly, the person looked back alertly, and Lily hurriedly pulled her body back. But it was too late. Her foot accidentally hit a small pebble, and the friction caused a slight noise. Who's there? The person barked. Lily knew she was exposed and immediately turned to run. Rapid footsteps came from behind. She didn't dare look back and just focused on sprinting forward. As she fled, Belle's image flashed through Lily's mind. She gritted her teeth and decided not to call for help. She didn't want to drag Belle into such a dangerous situation. The pursuer's footsteps drew closer, and an arrow grazed Lily's shoulder. It hurts. Lily clutched her shoulder and rounded a corner, only to find herself stumbling into an open area. Before she could react, she felt the ground vanish beneath her feet, and she fell into a deep pit. A rustling sound came from the bottom of the pit. Lily looked closely and gasped. Densely packed killer ant were swarming toward her, opening their sharp mandibles. What a perfect way to silence someone. A cold voice came from above the pit. Goodbye, Lily. Clearly, this adventurer had recognized Lily as being from the same familia. Lily closed her eyes in despair, silently saying goodbye to Belle in her heart. The swarm of killer ant gradually submerged her, and darkness enveloped everything. Her heart was filled with regret and frustration. Why did she track that suspicious person alone? Why didn't she wait for Belle to act together? Now, she might never see Belle again. Just as Lily was about to give up hope, a familiar voice suddenly rang out in the distance. Lily. Where are you? Lily felt countless sharp mandibles tearing at her skin, and the intense pain forced a shrill scream from her lips. She waved her hands desperately, trying to drive away the ferocious killer ants, but they continued to swarm in relentlessly. Her arms and legs were soon covered in deep wounds that exposed the bone, and blood gurgled from the gashes. Lily gritted her teeth, using the last of her strength to try and crawl out of the deep pit, but her fingers could only scratch futilely at the dirt on the walls. As her physical strength rapidly drained away, Lily's consciousness began to blur. Scenes from the past flashed before her eyes, the moment she first met Belle, the happy times they spent exploring the dungeon, and those warm moments late at night when they confided in each other. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of Lily's mouth. She remembered the promise she had once made to explore this mysterious underground world together with Belle. Now, it seemed this dream would never be realized. Darkness gradually swallowed her vision, and Lily felt herself falling into a boundless void. Her final thought was a wish for Belle to be safe and to continue the adventure they had left unfinished. Anxious and frantic, Belle ran through the dark underground labyrinth. His eyes scanned every corner urgently, searching for any sign of Lily. His worried shouts echoed through the underground caves. Lily! Lily! Where are you? Several hideous monsters suddenly lunged from the shadows, blocking Belle's path. But at this moment, he didn't care about these threats, nimbly bypassing them to continue forward. As every second ticked by, Belle felt the panic in his heart grow stronger. Suddenly, a faint groan reached Belle's ears. He skidded to a halt, carefully identifying the source of the sound. Following it, he came to the edge of a deep pit. By the dim light, Belle saw a scene that took his breath away. Lily lay at the bottom of the pit, her body covered in ferocious killer ants. Her skin was riddled with horrific wounds, and blood stained the surrounding soil red. Belle gritted his teeth, his gaze burning like fire. Without hesitation, he leapt, falling straight into the deep pit. The moment he landed, he dropped to one knee, his right hand gripping his longsword tightly and his left hand braced against the ground to steady himself. Lily. He let out a low growl, his voice filled with determination. His sword light flashed like lightning as Belle swung his blade, flicking the killer ants off Lily's body with blinding speed. Every strike was incredibly precise, as if he had practiced them thousands of times. The blade sliced through the air with a sharp whistle, interweaving with the buzzing of the killer ants to form a bizarre battle song. Suddenly, a swarm of killer ants rushed in from all directions. Belle spun around, and wherever his blade pointed, the ants were sliced in two. His movements were fluid and seamless, as if he were performing an elegant yet deadly dance. Fury burned in Belle's eyes, and every strike carried immense power. His swordsmanship became increasingly violent, like a lion protecting its cub, tearing apart any enemy that dared to approach. Blood splattered in the air, and the corpses of the killer ants piled up like a mountain. Belle's breathing became heavy, and sweat slid down his cheeks, but his movements didn't slow in the slightest. Finally, the last killer ant fell. Belle panted heavily, looking around to confirm that the danger had passed. He turned and knelt by Lily's side, carefully picking her up. Hang in there, Lily. Belle whispered, his voice trembling slightly, I'm getting you out of here. Hold on, Lily. I'm here to save you. While comforting her, Belle quickly pulled first aid supplies from his backpack. He carefully cleaned Lily's wounds, applied ointment, and bandaged the injured areas. Under Belle's gentle and firm care, Lily finally opened her eyes. She gave a weak smile and said softly, Belle, you came. Belle squeezed her hand tightly, tears welling in his eyes. We promised to explore together, how could I leave you behind? Without another word, Belle carefully picked Lily up and ran swiftly toward the surface. His pace was hurried yet steady, his eyes focused only on the path ahead. He ignored the monster corpses and treasures scattered around, not sparing them even a single glance. As he ran, Belle focused all his attention on Lily's condition. He could feel the breathing of the person in his arms growing weaker, which made his heart tighten even more. Belle gritted his teeth and pushed his legs to move even faster. Faster, just a little faster, Belle urged himself repeatedly in his mind. The surrounding scenery blurred past, and the roars of monsters gradually became indistinct. Belle's consciousness seemed isolated from the outside world, with all his attention concentrated on Lily. He could feel Lily's life slipping away bit by bit, which filled him with frantic anxiety. Belle's breathing became rapid, and sweat poured down his face. But he didn't dare slow his pace for a second, fearing that even a moment's delay would lead to irrevocable consequences. In this race against time, every step Bell took was like walking on a knife's edge, with only one thought in his mind: he must save Lily. While Liu was out purchasing ingredients for the pub, she heard passers-by mentioning a white-haired, red-eyed youth covered in blood rushing past. She immediately grabbed the passerby by the collar to demand details, and upon learning Bell's direction, she charged out. She happened to see Bell carrying a frail little person girl with a weak aura. Without time to explain to Bell, she snatched the unconscious Lily from his arms and began to chant. Song of the distant forest, melody of past life. To the one who seeks thee, bestow the mercy of healing. Fortunately, Liu's skill Noah Heal, as a single target skill, had a very strong restorative effect, largely healing Lily who had been on the brink of death. Then Liu looked at the anxious Bell. Instead of asking what had happened, she spoke to soothe his emotions. Her life is stable now, but she needs rest. Bell then took the unconscious Lily and went with Liu to the Hestia residence. Hestia and Hephaestus had been chatting in the church basement. Seeing Bell covered in blood, Hestia was startled. Fortunately, things were explained clearly afterward, or she would have dragged Bell off to the Dian sect Familia for treatment. Hestia settled Lily onto the only bed in the basement and then stared at Bell. Feeling the gaze like thorns on his back, Bell could only give an awkward smile. Hestia punched Bell on the head, but unfortunately, it was Hestia's hand that ended up hurting instead. Hestia blew on her aching hand while looking at Bell. All right, tell me what happened. How did you get so badly injured exploring the dungeon? Were you being reckless again, and you even dragged the supporter girl into it? Bell had a headache, not knowing how to explain his mistake to Hestia, so he had no choice but to recount the events exactly as they happened. Hestia listened carefully to Bell's account, her brow gradually furrowing. Her gaze shifted back and forth between Bell and the unconscious Lily on the bed, as if she was trying hard to piece together the truth of the incident. So, you're saying Lily got separated during the monster surge? Hestia pondered for a moment and speculated. Then she might have fled in panic and accidentally fallen into some hidden trap. Bell nodded in confirmation, adding, when I found her, she was already on the brink of death. The area was littered with monster corpses, it looked like she fought desperately. Hestia sighed, looking at Lily with heartache. This poor child has really suffered. The dungeon's traps are notoriously insidious, and coupled with the monster siege, it's a miracle she's still alive. However, Ryu, who was standing nearby, frowned. She carefully examined the wounds on Lily's body, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Wait. Ryu suddenly spoke up. These wounds don't seem right. All eyes focused on Ryu. She carefully lifted Lily's clothes and pointed to a peculiar scar on her shoulder. Look, the shape and size of these wounds clearly weren't caused by monsters. Ryu explained, they look more like marks left by arrow-type weapons. Bell and Hestia exchanged a surprised glance. The atmosphere in the room instantly grew heavy. Ryu continued her analysis. I suspect Lily may have been the target of a premeditated attack. She fled in panic and only then accidentally fell into the trap. These weapon-inflicted wounds were likely the main cause of her severe injuries. For a moment, silence fell over the room. Expressions of varying degrees of shock and worry appeared on everyone's faces. Bell clenched his fist, sparks of anger flashing in his eyes. If that's really the case, then I absolutely won't let the person who attacked Lily get away with it. Hestia gently patted Bell's shoulder, trying to soothe his emotions. The most important thing right now is for Lily to recover her health. Once she wakes up, we can get the full story. Until then, we all need to stay vigilant. Everyone nodded in agreement. They knew a larger conspiracy might be hidden behind this incident. And now, the only thing they could do was protect Lily and wait for the truth to surface. Ryu still had work to do at the Hostess of Fertility, and to rush here, she had even dropped the groceries she was buying. She'd probably get scolded by Mamma Mia when she got back, so she couldn't stay long. Hephaestus also had a familia to manage and chose to leave as well. After Ryu left, Hestia looked at Bell. Who is that green-haired elf? Huh. Suddenly realizing Hestia didn't know Ryu, he had to explain, framing Ryu's identity as a friend he'd met by chance. Bell sat quietly by the head of the bed, his gaze never leaving the sleeping Lily. His eyes were filled with gravity, his brow tightly knit, clearly deep in thought. The room was silent, with only the faint, barely audible sound of Lily's steady breathing. Bell's mind raced, trying to make sense of this sudden attack. He first considered whether someone had hurt Lily out of hatred for him. The members of the Soma Familia who had once extorted Lily came to mind, but he quickly dismissed the idea. When he rescued Lily back then, he had carefully concealed his figure, didn't even use a weapon, and wore a mask. Given that, it was unlikely the attacker was targeting him. Bell's thoughts turned to another possibility: this attack was aimed at Lily herself. He recalled the rampage in the labyrinth and began to suspect it might not have been an accident. Maybe Lily inadvertently discovered something she shouldn't have. Bell speculated privately, and the culprit attacked her to silence her. This guess seemed more plausible, but Bell knew it was just one of many possibilities. He tried hard to recall every detail, searching for clues he might have overlooked. However, the deeper he thought, the more convoluted the matter seemed. Just as Bell was fully immersed in this mental storm, concentrating intensely on the attacker's identity, a faint movement came from the bed. He abruptly looked up to see Lily's eyelids flutter lightly as she slowly opened her eyes. Lily's eyelids trembled slightly, and she let out a faint, almost inaudible moan. This tiny movement immediately caught Bell's attention. He jerked his head up, his gaze tightly fixed on the girl on the bed. Bell held his breath, afraid of disturbing Lily. He gently nudged Hestia, who was dozing beside him, signaling her to wake up. Hestia quickly became alert, and both of them instinctively leaned closer to the bedside. Lily slowly opened her eyes, her vision still somewhat blurry. When she realized two enlarged faces were hovering above her, she was startled. "Woe Tilda," she cried out instinctively, her body shrinking back unconsciously. This sudden reaction also startled Bell and Hestia. In their fluster, they both jerked their heads up and ended up banging them together hard. After a dull thud, they held their respective newly formed bumps, looking at each other awkwardly. "It's good that you're okay," Bell and Hestia said in unison, wearing expressions that were both pained and relieved. Rubbing their heads, they looked at Lily somewhat sheepishly, feeling a bit embarrassed by their earlier actions. "I'm feeling much better now. Thank you very much, Lord Bell. If you hadn't arrived in time, Lily would probably have already lost her life," Lily said weakly but sincerely, a light of gratitude shining in her eyes. Hearing these words, Bell felt somewhat comforted inside. He had been blaming himself earlier for taking too long to find Lily, nearly causing a disaster. Now, seeing Lily safe and sound, the guilt in his heart eased a little. However, watching the intimate interaction between the two, Hestia couldn't help feeling a twinge of jealousy. She quickly inserted herself between them, trying to change the subject. "Well then, Miss Lily," she asked, feigning nonchalance, "can you tell us what caused you to fall into the trap?" Lily hesitated for a moment, her eyes shifting between Bell and Hestia. She had originally intended to hide the truth, not wanting to drag Bell into danger. But Bell keenly sensed her hesitation. "Lily, please don't hold anything back," Bell said gently but firmly. "This attack might very well be targeting us. Only by knowing the enemy's identity can we resolve this." Encouraged by Bell, Lily took a deep breath and began to recount what happened in the labyrinth. She described how she had accidentally discovered the true culprit behind the monster rampage, a member of the Soma Familia. After hearing this, Bell realized his earlier guess was wrong. This wasn't personal revenge, it was organized crime. The Soma Familia was using the monster rampage to cover up their misdeeds, harming innocent adventurers and stealing their belongings. Bell's expression turned serious. He realized they weren't facing an ordinary enemy, but a dangerous, organized criminal group. This required a much tougher approach to deal with. Bell suddenly thought of something. "By the way, Lily, did that Soma Familia member recognize you? If so, then perhaps the Soma Familia already knows about your death. Maybe we can use a feigned death to help you escape from the Soma Familia." Hearing this, Lily's eyes lit up, but she still had concerns. Although Hestia was dissatisfied with Lily and Belle's closeness, she wholeheartedly approved of this idea. And so, with some reluctance, Lily agreed to stay at the Hestia Familia's base, temporarily avoiding going outside to lay low for a while. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the room through the curtains. Belle got up quietly, not wanting to disturb Lily, who was still fast asleep. He carefully closed the door, gave Lady Hestia a brief explanation, and set out on the road to the dungeon. At the entrance to the dungeon, adventurers were bustling about. Belle took a deep breath, gripped the sword at his waist, and strode into the dark passage. His goal today was the orcs on the 10th floor. They were level 1 but had strength comparable to level 2. In sufficient numbers, they should provide enough pressure to accumulate experience for a great feat. Belle moved cautiously through the labyrinth, the occasional roar of monsters in the distance reaching his ears. Suddenly, a violent vibration shook the ground, which began to sway intensely. Belle immediately became alert, his body tensing as he prepared for battle. In the next moment, a massive minotaur charged out from around the corner. The half-man, half-bull monster was clearly in a berserk state. Its eyes were blood red, white steam snorted from its nostrils, and it was charging frantically toward Belle. Is this the scene where the story begins? Belle quickly dodged the minotaur's first charge, his heart pounding violently in his chest. He pressed himself against the wall, gasping for air while carefully observing the giant creature's movement patterns. When the minotaur turned, Belle noticed it had a brief pause after every charge, as if it were adjusting its balance. That tiny gap might be the key to a counterattack. Taking a deep breath, Belle drew the short bow from his back. He aimed at the minotaur's eye and released his fingers. The arrow whistled through the air, but only left a white scratch on the monster's hard skull. Belle cursed inwardly and quickly switched tactics. The monster charged again. Belle rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the lethal strike. He drew the sword from his waist and, as the minotaur turned, slashed a deep wound into its hind leg. Blood gushed out, and the minotaur let out a deafening roar. It charged with its massive horns with ferocious momentum. Belle was forced to retreat repeatedly, nearly cornered into a dead end. The battle lasted for several minutes, and Belle's stamina began to fail. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and his arms were aching from the frequent sword swings. Though the minotaur was covered in wounds, it remained exceptionally fierce. Belle fired 2 consecutive arrows at the minotaur's eyes. The monster instinctively closed them and lowered its head slightly. Belle seized this fleeting opportunity, leapt forward, and thrust his sword straight into the monster's throat. The sharp blade pierced the minotaur's flesh, and blood gushed out like a fountain. The monster let out one last mournful cry and crashed to the ground. As the monster fell with a thud, Belle breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to process the loot, he suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He turned alertly and found a doll-like blonde swordswoman and a werewolf with a fierce appearance. Bet looked at the fallen minotaur in surprise, then sized up the panting but unharmed Belle, and couldn't help but remark, looks like a capable newcomer. Ice nodded silently. Ding! Fate has taken a turn. Obtained Silver Wheel of Fate 1. Belle's brow furrowed slightly, but then quickly smoothed out. Indeed, in the original story, Belle was saved by ice, which triggered Liaris Freeze, granting him incredible experience bonuses and leveling speed. But now, he had dealt with the Minotaur himself without needing Ice's rescue, essentially changing many subsequent stories directly. Compared to just forming a bond with a deity or training skills, the impact on fate itself was much greater. Ice and Bet watched Belle's expression shift uncertainly, not understanding what was going on. Bet said directly to Ice, "Since the Minotaur is dealt with, let's head back." Ice also nodded in agreement and turned to leave. Belle watched Ice and Bet's retreating figures, then cautiously scanned his surroundings. Even though the Minotaur had been defeated, the dangers of the dungeon still lurked in every corner. To ensure his safety, he quickly found a high ground that adventurers frequently cleared and set traps around it to prevent monsters from charging out and threatening him. After climbing up, he could clearly observe movements from 6 directions. Standing on the high ground, Belle finally relaxed his tense nerves slightly. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and concentrated his attention. As his consciousness immersed itself, a silver wheel slowly emerged in his mind. The wheel was about 1 meter in diameter, and its entire body emitted a soft silver light. Fine runes were engraved on the edge of the wheel, while the center was divided into several fan-shaped sections. Bell observed carefully and found that the rewards were distributed into 3 types: talents, items, and trials, with a ratio of approximately 1:3:2. What are trials? Bell murmured to himself, somewhat puzzled. However, now was not the time for deep investigation. He decided to proceed. Bell rubbed his hands together as if to psych himself up. He took a deep breath and prayed silently, Supreme Lord Laozi protect me, God of Wealth protect me, Lady Hestia protect me. Then, he reached out and gently touched the illusory wheel. Driven by his will, the wheel began to spin slowly, flickering with a mysterious light. Bell held his breath, waiting for fate's choice. Then the pointer landed on item, and a brilliant gold light nearly blinded him. Holy crap! He hadn't been paying attention, and it came to trick and sneak attack a 14-year-old kid. Grimoire, Weave Fire Element Chapter. Description: a book recording the mysteries of the weave. It also records the life of the mage who was its author. A certain goddess of magic is very angry about losing her grimoire. From a certain thief deity. The weave. Something from D&D. Then is that goddess of magic, whatever, it's not important, she won't chase me down here. However, with a grimoire, does that mean I can obtain magic? You have to know, I didn't have a single spell before, and I felt like I was destined to be isolated from magic like an ordinary mortal. Bell hurried to claim the reward. Looking at the hardcover book with gilded edges in front of him, he opened it. Mysterious runes were drawn inside, and he felt as if he were falling into layers of mist. Bell opened his eyes and saw a youth who looked exactly like him standing opposite. He asked, "Who are you?" The youth asked back, "Who do you think I am?" Bell fell silent and then guessed, "Are you the original Bell?" The youth shook his head. "No, I am you, and yet I am not you. In this world, from the very beginning, Bell has been you, there is no doubt about that. I am your ID. The ID is the complete subconscious, your desires, you can understand it as your animal nature. Without the guidance of the grimoire, I would not have appeared before you. The years of fear of the black dragon, the inferiority complex, though you haven't shown it, you have never forgotten. It is right here, right in your heart." Then the white-haired youth waved his hand, and the originally dark space transformed. A pitch-black dragon circled above Orario, a cold red light flashing in its single eye. Every flap of its wings whipped up violent currents of air, swirling the rubble on the streets into the air. The dragon's breath poured down like a world-ending torrent. Flames swallowed the streets and buildings, turning everything to ash. Temples collapsed, markets turned to scorched earth, and the once prosperous city was now left with only wails of despair. Bell stood before the Tower of Babel, his hands clenched into fists. He saw Lady Hestia lying in a pool of blood, her gentle smile frozen on her face. Ice's sword was broken in two, and her blonde hair was stained red with blood. Lilyruka, well, one after another they fell. Those familiar faces were now all looking at him with hollow eyes. Their gazes were full of questioning. Why did it turn out like this? What exactly did you do? Amidst the dragon's roar, Bell felt an unprecedented sense of powerlessness. He wanted to save everyone, but he could only watch helplessly as all this happened. The sky was dyed blood red, as if silently mocking his incompetence. Bell remained silent. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching my video. Please like and share it.